It all starts with that one simple step. So what are you waiting for? Grab your phone, hit record, and let your idea fly. The future of your startup could be just one video away. Remember, be clear, be passionate, and most importantly, be you. We can't wait to see what you've got. Let's get funded now.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 11:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We are looking at a gain right now for the S&P 500 index, up 11, up by about 0.2%. Dow Industrials now up 252, up by about 0.6%. And NASDAQ, though, remaining in the red, lower. Little change now, down under 0.1%. NASDAQ down 15, a drop there of 0.1%. The Russell 2000 index, though, pushing higher, up now by about 1.4%. The 10-year yield currently at 4.40% with a 2-year 4.36%. Gold up $31 the ounce, $27.01, up 1.2%. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.2%, just under 71 a barrel now, 70.94 on WTI. Bitcoin at 98,750, up by about 0.7%. Economic data this morning: the University of Michigan's Consumer Sentiment Index posted a muted increase following the presidential election. And with that story, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
Late November's reading of 71.8 is below the initial tally, but still the highest since April. Economists had expected further improvement in consumer sentiment. Inflation expectations eased to a 4-year low, and the general outlook for household finances brightened in a nationwide survey. Confidence among Democrats sank after the presidential election, offsetting rising confidence among Republicans. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
Speaking of consumers, McDonald's has unveiled an overhaul of its value platform that it hopes will lure penny-pinching customers back into its restaurants. The company's new McValue lineup will launch on January 7th. McDonald's shares up today by 0.3%. Rival Wendy's down 1.1%. And Restaurant Brands International, it is higher by 0.1%. Restaurant Brands uses the ticker QSR, as in quick service restaurant. Again, recapping, stocks higher with the S&P up by about 0.1%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, thanks so much, Charlie Pellet. Really appreciate it. Alex Steele here alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. So we have a headline crossing right now from the AP that New York Giants agree to release quarterback Daniel Jones. Now, for more on that, we're going to go to Paul Sweeney.
Well, I think it's the right move for the Giants. He's clearly not in their plans going forward, so there's no reason to make him keep coming to the building and coming to practice when he's never, ever going to see the field again because of there's a part of his contract that says if he were to play in any capacity and suffer an injury, they'd be on the hook for a big payment, and they don't want to take that risk. So that's just part ways. He had his little press conference yesterday where he read a statement, so probably the right thing to do.
Okay.
There you go.
Thanks. Appreciate that. And that was your sports update by Paul Sweeney. On the news, the New York Giants agree to release quarterback Daniel Jones. All right, what do you guys want to hear on Bloomberg Radio? Help make sure that shows like ours are even better by taking our Bloomberg audience survey. You can go ahead and visit youtube.com/Bloomberg Podcast. Click on the link in our profile or community section to take the survey. That's hosted by our partners, Material. Fill it out now at youtube.com/Bloomberg Podcast. All right, let's get back to the market here and sort of what's next. I'm getting all the research about 2025 and what to expect. Christina Hooper, Chief Global Market Strategist at Invesco, joins us now. I feel like every strategist is now 6,500 to 6,600 on the S&P for next year. Is this the right metric for us to be looking at right now?
So, Alex, we actually don't give a set target, but I do think directionally it's appropriate to assume that we see stocks go up next year. But I think we shouldn't just be looking at the S&P 500. We should be looking at markets outside the U.S., and I think directionally they're likely to move higher as well. And I actually think we could see UK equities, for example, outperform US equities next year. I think there are opportunities in emerging markets equities. So there is a lot more out there than just focusing on US large cap stocks.
That feels sacrilegious, Christina. I thought it was the whole US exceptionalism kind of thing.
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily U.S. exceptionalism. We had a few things going in our favor over the last few years that made the U.S. economy more resilient. Namely, I think first and foremost would be long-term fixed-rate mortgages. That meant the transmission mechanism for monetary policy wasn't as strong in the U.S. We just didn't have as negative an impact from aggressive tightening as some other Western developed economies, and that certainly was helpful. The other key factor, I think, was the amount of fiscal stimulus thrown at the U.S. economy by the federal government. A lot of governments put stimulus into their economies, but not at the level that the U.S. did.
Christina, when you woke up 2 weeks ago, Wednesday, and we've got, we saw the new presidential election results, and now we know that Congress is firmly in the hands of Republicans. Has that changed kind of how you guys at Invesco think about asset allocation, how much risk you want to take? Did the elections change anything for you guys?
Not very much, because we think it's far more important. The more important factor is who is sitting at the helm of the Fed than who is sitting in the White House. I think the reality is that monetary policy matters more for markets. Now, that doesn't mean that policy coming out of the White House has no impact. We think of it as something akin to swing factors. We have to be concerned about tariffs. That certainly, the first time around, created more volatility and created some sell-offs for the stock market. We also have to think about, for example, immigration policy and the potential for it to impact inflation. But those are really eclipsed by monetary policy and by all the factors that have gone into the U.S. economy thus far that have enabled it to have essentially a soft landing, and what I think prepares us for reacceleration next year.
When we take a look at the central bank cutting cycle, let's leave Japan out of it, do you need to think about the areas where we might see more cuts? So I'm just looking at the data from Europe in terms of the PMIs. They were terrible. Now we're talking about, we're going to see a 50 basis point cut. Is that a good indication of kind of where to go by how much the bank can cut?
Well, I certainly think that is one helpful factor to consider. I think it certainly matters in terms of currencies, but I do think that the more easing that comes, certainly that can be a powerful catalyst for economies. We also have to recognize that part of the equation for investing is how much negative sentiment is priced in. And so when we do have a scenario where there's some negative data coming out, there is the potential for positive surprise, especially if we have significant easing. So I am excited about European equities. I also think the valuations are attractive. I think dividend yields are solid. So that's certainly, those are all factors that I would consider that make for investors, make a compelling case for investors to at least have some exposure to European equities.
Fixed income space, Christina, do I sit with my 2-year Treasury at 4.36%, or do I take some credit risk out there?
I think you need to take some credit risk. The U.S. economy is in rather good shape, and there's the potential for, I think, there's a very good likelihood that we see a reacceleration in the U.S. economy next year. So in this environment, you want to take credit risk. You want to have exposure to high quality, high yield, investment grade, bank loans. This is an environment where there are many attractive asset classes within the fixed income space.
What happens to all the money in money market funds? Do you think eventually that winds up taking on more risk? How long does that take?
So I think it absolutely eventually goes into both equities and fixed income. And I think that as we see continued easing by the Fed, that's certainly a helpful catalyst, as well as the psychological impact of FOMO. I think we're likely to see stocks move higher from here, and not just stocks in the U.S., elsewhere. And so I think those are all reasons why and drivers for money starting to come out of cash.
I'm thinking about it.
Thinking about it? Look at you.
If I'm thinking about it, that means stuff. I definitely have some viewers that ping me all the time. And they're like, what are you doing? Get into high yield ETFs. Come on now. All right, Christina, thanks a lot. We really appreciate it. Christina Hooper joining us from Invesco. She's the Chief Global Market Strategist over on that side. Did you see the McDonald's thing? Charlie might have briefly touched on it, but did you see that one?
It's a $5
so we reported on this, but now it actually is real that McDonald's is including a $5 meal and a buy one, add one for $1 offer. So that value meal is continuing, and then you have a buy one, add one for $1.
It's pretty solid. That'll get you in the door.
That's something, right?
A number 2 with a Coke. It's the same order I've had
since I was
15.
What's the number 2 again?
Quarter pound of cheese.
Okay.
And then it's the same order I've had since I was 15. It works fine. Just don't change your numbers up on me.
Oh, that would be funny.
Yep.
Then you get some kind of like fish McNugget.
Exactly.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Friday, everybody. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news in business, economics, and finance through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence folks. They cover 2,000 companies in 130 industries all around the world. All right, let's take a look at these markets here. My question is, what do you pay attention to next? You got NASDAQ flat, S&P up 0.2%, Dow's up 0.3%, volume pretty light. We got through NVIDIA. We do have a Fed meeting. We got a jobs data. But are we just going to be putting on positions here and just holding the line until, I don't know, January?
I think we are. I mean, I think it seems like the market is, Christina Hooper from Invesco was saying that the market's kind of finding its footing here in a new political environment here, starting to discount what we do know into the prices of assets. And so now maybe, with the election behind you, you can get back to kind of thinking about where this economy is going, what the Federal Reserve needs to do to kind of achieve its goals of employment and price stability. And then, again, going back to corporate earnings and kind of blocking and tackling here, that would be, I think, a good scenario. What you don't need is just external shocks to come in here, which they could come from anywhere, of course.
Yeah, exactly. And then the question I also have, too, is like, what is tech? Meaning that, are we actually seeing a rally broaden out? And there's lots of different ways to look at that. I should point out Bloomberg Intelligence, Gina Martin Adams had a great piece out that talked about just that and charted the NVIDIA contribution to overall S&P earnings and tech contribution to overall S&P earnings and how it has declined. It's still there, but it has declined, meaning that the rally is broadening out.
All right, and that's a good thing from what I understand, what I remember from my business school courses. Let's talk space. We're sending people up to space. We got all this.
Would you go to space?
I would. I thought about this. I would. Bruce Einhorn joins us. Space business reporter. How cool is that? The kids can tell him my dad's a space business reporter. He's down in Princeton, New Jersey. Hey, Bruce, talk to us about Blue Origin. What's going on there with Blue Origin and their space activity?
So today we had a launch. This was the 9th human flight that the company has had. Just a few minutes, right? So it was one of those up and down things where the 6 passengers on board and they experienced weightlessness for a few minutes. The total time of the mission was just over 10 minutes. Interesting about it, this was the 12th mission for the booster that was used on this rocket. So New Shepard can reuse their boosters. The company had suspended human missions in September of 2022 after anomaly. They resumed having them in the springtime.
So this was then a coup that they actually were able to accomplish it, right? And then the human space flight. Then what's next for Blue Origin?
Well, the much more important things are coming up, right? So this is, it's nice for people who are on board to be able to experience weightlessness for a few minutes, right? But the really important stuff for Blue Origin is coming up. So they have a much bigger rocket called the New Glenn, and that's been delayed, but that would be Blue Origin's answer, say, to SpaceX's Falcon 9, so able to carry a lot of payloads to orbit. The company hasn't said when that launch will take place. We're expecting that it will be maybe by the end of the year. So that's still something we're keeping an eye on. That will be really important for the ability of Blue Origin to really become a major competitor to SpaceX, which at the moment really dominates the market.
That's kind of where I wanted to go. So I'm just keeping straight in my own mind. Blue Origin is owned by Jeff Bezos. SpaceX is owned by Elon Musk. What's the competitive landscape between those two companies and those two gajillionaires?
Well, just to be clear, they're not owned just by those billionaires, but you're right that the billionaires are the main force behind both of those companies. And they do come up against one another, especially if you consider not just Blue Origin, but other parts of the Jeff Bezos world, which obviously includes Amazon. So Amazon has a plan to put up a satellite network, what we call a constellation in low Earth orbit, that would be for satellite communications, similar to what SpaceX has with Starlink. Starlink has more than 6,000 satellites in operation. They're adding dozens more every month. They are now in over 100 countries worldwide. Huge lead that they have. Amazon at the moment doesn't have any operational satellites up for Project Kuiper, but they have big plans and they want to be launching thousands more in the next few years. So they are far behind, but don't underestimate Amazon and its ability to catch up here. In order for them to really do that, they need to have a lot of rocket capacity. They have contracts with, among others, Blue Origin. So two parts of the Jeff Bezos empire align there, where Amazon really needs the Blue Origin New Glenn rocket to work well in this first launch, and then really begin putting satellites up, because they need that in order to catch up to SpaceX.
All right, Bruce, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. Bruce Einhorn, Bloomberg space business reporter, joining us on Blue Origin's human flight that just transpired. I guess my question also becomes, what do governments play a role in this in terms of regulation or not? Not in terms of like paying them to do stuff for them, but in terms of regulation. I don't actually know the answer to that.
I would think there'd be some safety issues they'd want to look at. I'm not sure how, where the role of NASA is in here. I'm just not that close to the story about what role NASA is in here, because that was kind of the only game growing up.
Oh yeah, but now, now there's lots of different games, and they can use a lot of different kind of companies. Anyway, that wraps it up for Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. For myself and Paul Sweeney, guys, have a wonderful weekend. Coming up, Balance of Power with Joe Matthews coming up right after this global news update. Have a wonderful weekend. We'll see you Monday.
This is CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by Progressive Insurance.
I'm Steve Kaif, and the judge.
Okay, today I'm going to talk about how to succeed with a startup. Obviously, more than can be said here in 20 minutes, but I will do the best I can. The most important thing, the number one lesson we try to teach startups, is that the degree to which you're successful approximates the degree to which you build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it. Startups always ask us for the secret to success. They always want to believe it's something other than this, because this is really hard to do. But this is it. If you can build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it, you have done 80% of the work that you need to be a really successful startup. If you think about the most successful companies you know, Google, Facebook, whatever, you probably found out about them because a friend of yours said, you got to try this, it's great. So this is the bar. Something that people love so much they tell their friends about it. One important indicator for a product like that is a product that's simple to explain and easy to understand. If you can't explain in a few words what you do, and if at least some people don't say, oh, that's pretty interesting, that's usually a mistake. It's usually a sign of unclear thinking or a need that is not big enough.
I want a bank that shows me what I spend instantly.
We're Monzo. Give us a go. See?
Well, I want a bank that can help me budget for the things I need, like a new leather jacket for Bingo.
We can do that.
Bingo's my cockapoo.
Hi, Bingo.
It's a real faff to sign up.
It takes less than 10 minutes.
Race you.
You're on. Time's up. How'd you get on?
It's a draw.
Is it? We hear you, Bingo. You make Monzo Monzo.
Hi, I'm Laurie Haynes, CEO and co-founder of Shirar, and I'm really excited to tell you that we are going to be raising funds for Shirar again. After a successful raise in 2023, it's time to scale.
We hope that you enjoy the pitch deck and the financial model. Any questions, please don't hesitate to ask us, and we can't wait for you to be part of Shirar.
I will show you how to get the best funding for your startup idea. Let's get started. Here's the deal. If you have an amazing startup idea and need funds to fuel it, we're here to help. Simply send us a video where you explain your idea. Make it clear, concise, and compelling. Hook us in with your passion and vision. Don't forget to include your contact details so investors can reach out directly. This is your chance to shine and get your idea in front of people who can make it a reality. Imagine turning your startup dream into a thriving business. It all starts with that one simple step. So what are you waiting for? Grab your phone, hit record, and let your idea fly. The future of your startup could be just one video away. Remember, be clear, be passionate, and most importantly, be you. We can't wait to see what you've got. Let's get funded now.
.com/free.
Authorities in Wisconsin say they have heard from a man who faked his own drowning last summer so he could leave his wife and 3 children. Ryan Borgward is somewhere in Eastern Europe. He says he has no intention of returning. The songwriter who came up with a catchy tune for a squishy yellow sea sponge has died.
Mr. Sun came up and he smiled at me. Andy Paley worked with SpongeBob's late creator Stephen Hillenburg in the early 2000s on the soundtrack for the cartoon. He came up with this peppy ditty with an assist from voice actor Tom Kenny and late NRBQ drummer Tom Ardolino. It's the best day ever. Paley also collaborated with the Beach Boys' Brian Wilson, Jerry Lee Lewis, the Ramones, Madonna, and Elton John. His rep says Paley died after a brief battle with cancer. He was 72. Deborah Rodriguez, CBS News.
And I'm Steve Kathan, CBS News.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Washington, D.C.
It's take 2 on Attorney General. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as Donald Trump picks Pam Bondi to run the Department of Justice just moments after Matt Gaetz withdrew his name from nomination. We'll have the latest on the transition. Still no pick for Treasury Secretary coming up with Nathan Dean at Bloomberg Intelligence. Analysis today from our signature panel. Back together again, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, Bloomberg Politics contributors. And it's New Jersey or bust this hour. You chose wisely as we bring you conversations with Democratic Senator George Helmy and with Governor Phil Murphy, only here on Bloomberg, so stay where you are as we start, as always, with a look at Wall Street. For that, of course, we turn to our friend Charlie Pellet in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there, Joe Matthew. Happy Friday again. We say it every Friday. What a week it has been, but we've got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing for now. NASDAQ has been swinging between gains and losses, but right now looking at a 1-point advance. NASDAQ at 18,973. The S&P higher by 16, now up by about 0.3%. The Dow up 332, up by about 0.8%. Traders snapping up shares of blue chip and small cap stocks after a positive reading this morning on business activity. The 10-year now 4.40% with a 2-year 4.36%. We've got spot gold up 1.4%, higher by $35, $27.05 the ounce on the precious metal. West Texas Intermediate crude just below 71 right now. It is up 1.2%. And Bitcoin keeps on going. Bitcoin just taking out 99,000. Bitcoin, 99,013 right now, up by just about 1%. President-elect Donald Trump reportedly considering former Fed Governor Kevin Warsh for Treasury Secretary, then shifting him to Fed Chair after Jay Powell's term expires in 2026. And according to the Journal, Mohammed El-Arian is the president of Queens College, Cambridge, and a Bloomberg opinion columnist.
If you look at what he would bring to either or both jobs, first, a good understanding and knowledge of economics. You're talking about Stanford, Harvard, MIT. He would bring policy-making experience, the NEC and the Fed. He would bring private sector experience. He understands the functioning of the capital markets.
And it's a topic we'll have a whole lot more on coming up right here on Balance of Power. Retail news, we heard from Gap last night after the bell. Gap shares up today by 10.4%, taking other apparel retailers with it. Abercrombie & Fitch up now by 7%. Urban Outfitters up by 4.6%. Again, recapping, stocks right now higher. S&P up by 0.3%. Balance of power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, here he is, Joe Matthew.
Charlie Pellet, thank you so much with his view on Wall Street. Charlie, we'll be back a bit later on here on the Friday edition. Yes, you made it to the threshold of the weekend. Welcome to Balance of Power here on Bloomberg Radio, on the satellite radio, and on YouTube, where you can find us right now. Search Bloomberg Business News Live, but I know that's already part of your routine. It's nice to see you again here. We survived another week, and we still don't know who the Treasury Secretary is going to be. I know that's your first question every day when we come to air, and we're going to find out, remembering it was the week after Thanksgiving in the first Trump administration when the economic team was assembled. As Charlie Pellet mentioned, we're talking about now the Trump Treasury two-step. We'll explain that a little bit later when we spend some time with Nathan Dean. He's looking at all of the picks here, by the way, that we have heard. And I realize we still have some blanks to fill in and what they're going to mean for policy moving forward in the new administration, in the new Congress. How about this for a headline for you? The most important event of the day so far in Washington, the U.S. Capitol Christmas tree rolled up on the flatbed on the west front of the U.S. Capitol. Yes, it is the season. Now imagine a world with all the business we talk about here, the madness on Capitol Hill. Imagine a world in which you could become senator for a day or a couple of months and have the experience representing the state that you grew up in. That has been the experience for George Helmy, the newest senator in Washington, who's already packing his bags as a caretaker. This is the man nominated by the governor of New Jersey, Phil Murphy, to replace Senator Bob Menendez and fill the seat, holding it for Andy Kim when he comes in here after votes are certified. And it's a real pleasure to spend some time today with George Helmy. Senator, welcome to Bloomberg. It's great to have you. Did you ever think in the years you were working for Frank Lautenberg or Cory Booker that you would ever become a U.S. senator?
Joe, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be on with you. No, absolutely not. I'm a public policy person first and foremost. I've always enjoyed being, the guy behind the principal, and I've always enjoyed sort of being at the table but behind the scenes and not being, the candidate. But this has been an incredible experience, and frankly, as you point, it's been the continuance of a third tour of duty in the United States Senate in a different role. And obviously continuing my public service following my time as the longest-serving chief of staff in the state of New Jersey's history.
Well, that's pretty cool. And by the way, I do want our listeners and viewers to know that we're going to be having a conversation this same hour. We're bookending the hour with New Jersey, Senator. Your former boss, Phil Murphy, is going to be on in the second half of the hour in a special conversation. So let's talk about your experience for a moment. And I am curious, by the way, about your tenure, because I understand that there is a special arrangement here. You're going to hold the seat until, as I mentioned, votes are certified in New Jersey. That would mean Andy Kim is actually going to be part of this session. Is that the plan?
Yeah, well, first let me say you can never get enough New Jersey, especially with all the great things that are happening, especially in the business and innovation sector. So you've got a great Friday show planned here. But yes, Andy and I go way back. We've known each other for over a decade. I will be in the seat about 3 months, and I'm looking forward to him getting in. We had a great conversation last Friday about the things that I've carried coming out of the state and now working in the Senate. And I do hope to hand over the reins shortly. So, New Jersey, the way the seniority works in the Senate, will stand to gain from Andy having a few weeks ahead of the incoming freshman.
That's pretty cool. Give him a little bit of a head start. Does he get a bigger office? I don't know. You can let me know if that happens, because I know that your tenure has been brief, Senator, but you've actually sunk your teeth into some pretty important issues, and one of them is youth mental health awareness. You've come together with Katie Britt, which our audience should also know. You've reached across the aisle to work with a Republican from Alabama here on the floor of the Senate. Is this the defining issue for your brief term?
I've been really lucky, Joe, to get on all of the committees that Senator Menendez was on, which include, frankly, three of the most important committees in the United States Senate: banking, Finance and Senate Foreign Relations. But knowing that I was here for a short time, as you mentioned, I wanted to find an issue that I felt as a father and as a public policy person needed more attention, and that there was already bipartisan support. Knowing that things in the Senate, frankly, the things in Congress take a long time to get done. What could I use this opportunity, the relationships I already had? As you mentioned, Katie Britt, just like me, a former staffer turned senator, obviously she was elected to a full term. Where was there already momentum that I could use my time there to go talk to folks on both sides of the aisle in the Senate, and I've been really engaging members on the House to say, hey, this is a national issue. We know the data coming out of the 2010s about self-harm, young girls who are making suicide plans, exasperated, in my opinion, by the effects of the pandemic. What can we do to better protect our children on the front end, knowing what the inputs are to some of the issues we're facing, but also help create more access when we do have our young people in moments of crisis. And thankfully, we've been very successful in advancing the issue at a great colloquy on the floor, attended by many of our Republican and Democratic senators the other day. And we just introduced new legislation. And I'm hopeful. Look, I'm a public policy person, as I said a few times, Joe. I'm okay with none of this carrying my name when it gets done, but I really feel confident that sometime, whether it be next month or next year, we're going to see progress on this really important issue.
Well, I salute you for your approach here. One of your ideas is the Pride in Mental Health Act that I want to ask you about, Senator, would award grants to assess and improve mental health and substance use outcomes of LGBTQ plus youth. How do you rationalize this idea when next door in the House of Representatives, there's now a resolution that's been brought forth by the Speaker of the House to block the first transgender House member from using certain bathrooms? How do we have both at once?
Yeah, I mean, to me, they're really sort of disconnected, Joe. I really, with all the issues that Americans are facing, just using my own experience in public policy in the state of New Jersey, higher education costs are going up. We're still dealing with the inflationary challenges that came out of COVID. As you know, Joe, I've been so focused on the humanitarian ills and crises in the world, whether they be the 9 million in South Sudan that need daily humanitarian aid, the issues in Gaza, the issues in Ukraine, but really the issues that working families are facing. It's frankly surprising that the Republican leadership in the House spends so much time talking about bathrooms. On the other hand, we know the mental health issues and the vulnerability that our LGBTQIA youth already face. We have in New Jersey incredible nonprofit organizations that help those young people in moments of crisis so that they don't commit acts of self-harm and don't take their own lives, and to provide federal grants to better support them, I think is really important. As you know, a number of my bills also speak to the much broader issue, whether it be transparency in those who are going after our youth and providing grants for other opportunities for peer support, which is very important.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I just wonder what a headline like that means for mental health for young trans people. I have to ask you about SALT. If I'm talking to the senator from New Jersey here, this is something that comes up every day on Bloomberg. There's an effort now endorsed by Donald Trump himself to kind of undo what was done in the 2017 tax cuts, raise the cap. You're more specific. You want to exchange the $10,000 deduction for a $100,000 deduction. How's that going over?
I think there's been actually a great reception to it. I'm really happy that the president who installed the cap in the 2017 bill is now for lifting the cap. That's welcome news. I've had 2 hearings in the banking committee and the subcommittee that has jurisdiction over the tax policy. Just one the other day in which I elevated this again to the chairwoman and the Republican members, talking about the investments that New Jersey makes with its property taxes for the best public schools, for open spaces. And why I put a cap on it is, look, I come out of the business world, Joe, which I think is important for your audience to know. And these tax deductions do have a cost associated with them. And I think those who have significantly higher, above $100,000 in property taxes, can afford to pay a little bit more, while the majority of the middle class will be able to deduct a significant portion of their tax.
Well, Senator, I'm glad we had a chance to spend some time together. George Helmy, the Democrat from New Jersey, the pride of Jersey City. getting our New Jersey or Bust Hour off and running with style. Senator, thank you. You'll have to let me know if it's safe to go back to Morton's one of these days here in Washington, D.C. We'll have a lot more coming up. Nathan Dean is next here on Bloomberg.
It's 12:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We've got stocks pushing higher with the S&P 500 index on track for a winning week. Right now looks like a weekly gain of 1.7%. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index, Russell 2000, all pushing higher. The S&P now up 19. That is a gain of 0.3%. The Dow up 362, up 0.8%, while NASDAQ up 19, a gain of 0.1%. The 10-year 4.40% with a 2-year 4.36%. Gold up $36 the ounce to $27.06, up by 1.4%. West Texas Intermediate crude just under $71 a barrel. WTI up by 1.2%, and Bitcoin now up 1.3% at 99,363 on Bitcoin. United Parcel Service is going to pay $45 million to settle claims by the SEC that the courier misrepresented its financial financial results by improperly valuing its freight business. In sports, the Daniel Jones era in New York is over. The Giants quarterback was granted his release by the team just days after the franchise said it was benching him in favor of third stringer Tommy DeVito. And a civil jury in Ireland has just found that mixed martial arts fighter Conor McGregor sexually assaulted a woman in a hotel penthouse after a night of heavy partying. Again, recapping, stocks higher, S&P up 19, a gain there of 0.3%. Balance of power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you. You never know what Charlie's going to give you. You know, it's just following Charlie Pellet. I dare you to try it someday, either here on Bloomberg or on the subway in New York. I'm Joe Matthew. It's good to see you. You made it to Friday, the weekend before Thanksgiving. Maybe you have a long one. I hope for your sake that you do. It's awfully quiet around here in Washington as lawmakers head home for the holiday and we wait for the big transition, which we're, of course, talking about all day long around here. Let me just answer the question that you have in mind. We don't have a Treasury Secretary pick, but we do have a new concept. Let's work with what we have, right? We're going to go to war with the army we have, seems to be the idea at Mar-a-Lago, but we might need everybody for this. It's the Treasury two-step. President-elect floating this idea of Kevin Warsh as Treasury Secretary with the understanding he would be later nominated to run the Fed when Jay Powell's term as chair ends. Scott Bessent, meantime, keep him in the House, the White House. He runs the National Economic Council. He becomes Treasury Secretary when Warsh becomes Fed chair. Nathan Dean, how did I do?
I think you did great.
Is that that's really the plan here?
Well, I think that it's a plan that makes sense from President Trump's perspective because, you know, President Trump said prior that, you know, he's floated this idea of firing or demoting Jerome Powell at the Fed. We don't think that's going to happen. Yeah. Makes better sense just to let Powell serve out the rest of his term. But they've also floated this idea of a shadow banking Fed chairman. That's right. And if Kevin Warsh is now Treasury Secretary with the idea that in a year he's going to be the Fed chairman, Wall Street is going to be looking at the Department of Treasury over on over next to the White House. Yeah. They're not going to be looking down Constitution Avenue at the Fed. So it makes sense. Because with Kevin Warsh, you get somebody that Wall Street, I think, can work with, Wall Street respects, and then they move to the Fed, and then you get Scott Bessent at NEC chair to move up against somebody that Wall Street can work with. So I think this plan, if it were to go into fruition, certainly would pass the Senate. I think Wall Street would be pretty happy with it. I think a couple of folks on the populist side of the Republican Party may not be so happy with it. Okay. But I would also just remember, Treasury doesn't play the same amount of role that it plays in terms of tariffs like Commerce does, which is why Howard Lutnick at Commerce is much more important to President Trump's initial agenda of implementing those tariffs.
So you put yourself down at Mar-a-Lago. You know, the president-elect was interviewing all three. It was, right, Rowan, Warsh, Bessent this week. He's sitting down with Bessent. It was his idea to have this shadow Fed chair, right? So, you know, Mr. President, they start spitballing on this. I said, well, how about you? Maybe we could do that, make the Treasury Secretary be the shadow. You just hang out with me in the White House till he's done. We'll pull the trigger on this whole thing. Did they work it out together on the patio?
You know, I'm not sure. I mean, obviously, I wish I was on that patio. I mean, A, because of the weather, it's snowing here, but B, just to listen about how they're gaming this out. But what I will say is that President Trump wants speed. The reason why he wants these picks done and he wants to move them quickly is because every single moment that the Senate is focused on nominations, they're not focused on tax reform. And if Speaker Johnson kicks the funding fight from December into March, again, it's going to junk up a lot of President Trump's first 100 days up on Capitol Hill. Right. So if they can get this plan to work and if they can get enough Republican senators to go with it, I presume that they can, then you score your idea of moving quickly, getting a shadow Fed chair, and also making Wall Street's fairly comfortable with where you're going on two of the biggest picks from the economic perspective.
Meanwhile, Secretary Lutnick, assuming he's confirmed, becomes the tariff czar. They put USTR under Commerce. That's the tariff house. That's how that works. Treasury gets covered because Lutnick is doing it.
Yeah, so this is where the soap opera version of the Trump administration begins because on one hand, you're going to have President Trump pushing tariffs. Tariffs are very popular with the president. This is something he's campaigned on and most likely something that we're going to see in the first half of next year. But Wall Street, on the other hand, may not like tariffs so much. If companies like Home Depot or Nike or Adidas have to start buying a lot more expensive products from outside of the United States, Wall Street's not going to like that. So you're going to have the Treasury Secretary at one point saying, look, these stocks may be going into the red because of your tariff policy, but on the other hand, you're going to have Commerce saying, well, this is what we were elected to do. I don't envy them and how they're going to have this decision and how they're going to have to fight this out.
Boy.
But ultimately, it's going to be President Trump's decision to either direct Commerce to move forward with these tariffs or not. We will always tell our clients, though, just remember, tariffs, for the most part, come from the power of the presidency, which means you're going to see a lot of headline risk to begin. But then as the process plays out, there could be exemptions, there could be lobbying, there could be reciprocal tariff threats from China, for example. So presidents never back themselves into political back corners with tariffs. It's a long, drawn-out process as opposed to a magic wand that happens on day one.
Fascinating. Your eyebrows must have raised when you heard this idea of a crypto czar. Floated, we've got no details still, at least that I've heard, on what this is, what the title really would be. What agency this person would be floating around the White House somehow. Do you know anything about it, who that would be?
No, so but what we tell folks when it comes to czars is that they have fancy titles, but a lot of times they don't have huge implementation avenues. Because remember, in the crypto space, it's going to be the SEC chair and the CFTC chair that will be implementing regulations. It'll be Congress on the other end. So think of czars, in this case, the crypto czar, think of them as cheerleaders. They're going around, they're telling folks, yes, we are working on this. We're going to work with the SEC.
This is to
and
make
the
the market
CFTC.
happy.
It's to make the market happy. So, but czars are the most difficult positions from Washington because they can't have the power to actually implement things. They need to rely on others.
Well, meanwhile, Gary Gensler is packing up the office right now. There's a short list of about 100 people to replace him. How's this going to work?
Yeah, so, I think the SEC chair is a second-tier priority for Mar-a-Lago. The reason being is there's about 18 names I counted, which means 15 of them are probably self-promoting their own names.
You counted 18 possible contenders.
I counted 18 names. But for the SEC chair, what we're looking at is, are you going to get a crypto pick or a Wall Street pick? The crypto pick, there's a lot of money that's gone into President Trump's campaign to ensure that crypto is a top issue, but it's not the top issue for the SEC. Are you going to get a Wall Street pick? Think of somebody that comes from the Commissioner Paul Atkins, or even who came from the cloth of Jay Clayton, the former SEC chair. Now Trump's picked to lead the SDNY. That is a capital formation pick that will be close to Wall Street. I think what will happen over at the SEC is they'll hit pause. They'll wait until about April or May. It's a second-tier pick. You'll have a 2-2.
April or May?
Yeah, I think what they're going to do is they're going to focus on other things. You'll have Commissioner Wade or Commissioner Peirce, the Republican commissioners. One of them will step up to acting chair. They'll lay out an agenda, but I don't think you're going to see this really fast deregulatory effort over at the SEC.
The crypto loves this, right? I mean, we're looking at $100,000 here. The difference since the election has been wild, and the money made. I know you're not a technical analyst here, but those who do cover the space think there's a new floor, that this idea of a national reserve has completely changed the dynamic for Bitcoin, at least. Do you see it that way? So
sort of. So right now, the United States is sitting on around 208,000 Bitcoin. So, that's a lot of cash right now. And so, Senator Lummis has proposed this bill that the United States should build a strategic reserve of about 5% of the world's Bitcoin, so the United States can own it. So we already own 208,000. So that could be packaged together, put into what they call, quote unquote, a reserve. The problem, however, is to get additionally is you're going to need appropriations from Congress to essentially direct monies to purchase Bitcoin and or the executive branch is going to have to figure out how to finagle appropriations for other things to be used for purchase for Bitcoin. It's going to get messy. And so that's why I think this bill is the most likely scenario. Certainly something that we'll be talking about next year. I don't want to say it's going to have decent chances of passage immediately, but what I would always say to the Bitcoin crowd is, yes, you're getting good sentiment right now because you have a president who is going to be very much pro-crypto, but the logistics and the specifics of what cryptocurrency regulation looks like will more likely turning Coinbase into something like CME Group or the Intercontinental Exchange, very similar to what we see in the derivatives world today, which is not the wild, wild west.
Fascinating. Always fascinating to spend time with Nathan Dean at Bloomberg Intelligence. You're just back from a tour of European capitals because clients want to know what in the world is going on post-election. The great part about Nathan Dean is he's about to go on another tour of European capitals after Thanksgiving. What was the most common question, most common worry that you encountered?
So obviously the European tariffs, and our view on that is that it'll eventually come, but I think China's the highest priority. But then we got a lot of questions about the Inflation Reduction Act because there's a lot of European CapEx coming into the United States on these ideas that solar incentives are going to stick around. Wow. So our thought on the IRA is that even though you'll hear whispers of it being thrown into the tax reform debate, the IRA, for the most part, we think is cemented. It's $433 billion. That's cheap when you have to figure out how to pay for $4 to $4.5 trillion of tax extensions. Certain aspects of it can be cut, but ultimately, there's a lot of European money going in from the industrial base into southern Trump states like Alabama, Louisiana, and Texas that's building solar farms and solar plants, and local politicians do not want to see those 700 jobs disappear because of something that's happening.
Solar stocks have fallen off a cliff since the election.
Yeah, I mean,
could be an opportunity.
It could be an opportunity.
Great to see you. Happy Thanksgiving. Thanks for always being great. That's Nathan Dean, of course, you know that, with his patented fleece vest right here in the flesh. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. As I mentioned, an important interview ahead, Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey, as we now assemble our panel. They're with us a touch early, glad to say. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us on the Friday edition. Bloomberg Politics contributors. Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital. Jeannie is political science professor at Iona University. And yes, we do have some news here. Post-election, the last Senate race has actually been called. This happened yesterday. Senator Bob Casey of New Jersey conceding his seat to David McCormick. In fact, we heard from Bob Casey. If we can get a taste of that, let's listen.
I just called Dave McCormick to congratulate him on his election to represent Pennsylvania in the United States Senate. As the first count of ballots is completed, Pennsylvanians can move forward with the knowledge that their voices were heard, whether their vote was the first to be counted or the last. This race was one of the closest in our Commonwealth's history, decided by less than a quarter of a point. I'm grateful to the thousands of people who worked to make sure that every eligible vote cast could be counted.
So here we are. Republicans will now hold a 53 to 47 seat advantage in the United States Senate, on top of a razor-thin majority in the House. Rick Davis, 53 to 47 is actually pretty convincing based on some of the more recent margins that we've seen. What does this allow Republicans to do?
Sure, it's very convincing. I mean, the high for Republicans in the Senate's been 55 in the last few decades. So this is a healthy margin. It allows some Republicans who want to take a walk on certain critical issues to do that without harm in majority. Obviously, well short of a filibuster-proof Senate at 60, but we'll take it. Republicans are going to be able to dominate the agenda in the Senate and know that they've got a better than even chance in the House of Representatives of getting their material through, and vice versa. So Trump agenda is going to be welcome, and you'll see swift action by Congress in approving a number of those items probably in the first quarter of next year.
Jeannie, Bob Casey, about as well known as a politician is going to get, the family name certainly in the state of Pennsylvania. And when you look at his previous Senate campaigns, he won by 13 points in 2018, by 9 points in 2012, by 17 percentage points in 2006 when he dispatched Rick Santorum. When you look at the trajectory here and how it aligns with the leaning of the electorate in Pennsylvania and nationally, what does it tell you?
Well, it confirms what we know coming out of this election, that Democrats have a problem in the blue wall, particularly with the white working class. Although living in New York, I can tell you it's not just the white working class. It is the lower middle class overall that they are ceding to and losing to Donald Trump. I do want to add that in addition to Bob Casey's statement, I thought Dave McCormick issued a really, really genuine and a very nice note of statement of congratulations or of acceptance of Bob Casey's statement. I thought it was very gracious in the way it should be done. But I think it just confirms that Democrats have to rethink how they talk to, and not just message to, but the issues that they're focused on. And the big issues remain security, economic, and infrastructure, and border. And if they can't get it together to speak to people where they live, these kinds of races will be lost to the Democrats going forward.
Rick, if you look at Dave McCormick's Twitter feed, It's a scroll of Washington. It's a tour of the new office, the orientation, walking into the Senate for the first time. What is it like for a new member to go through the orientation, this whole process of arriving in Washington?
Well, especially what's exciting for Senator McCormick is that this was his second time around, lost in a primary to Mehmet Oz last cycle. Right. So he's been running for 4 straight years for this office, and now he's locked it in. And look, regardless of what you've done in your personal life, obviously David McCormick is incredibly successful in the business community. Now he gets to come to Washington and be one of 100, probably the most powerful club in the world when it comes to politics. And I think that those are always things that excite the new freshman class. They get to meet the heroes that they've seen on Capitol Hill, people who they admired and the work that they'd done in government. And so it's a pretty heady experience. And of course, think about it. They check in this month, they do some organizing next month, and next thing you know, they're sitting in very nice seats at the inaugural, and boom, they're on the floor of the Senate adjudicating major issues around the world.
Isn't that something? We spoke earlier this hour, Rick, with the senator from New Jersey, at least for now, George Helmy. He's actually caretaker, if you will, filling the seat that was left vacant by Bob Menendez and holding it for Andy Kim, who I guess is going to come in at the end of this session. What do you make of this move? Phil Murphy, who we're going to hear from in just a couple of moments, sent George Helmy to Washington to hold the seat until the end of November, essentially. New Jersey certifies its votes on the 5th of December. Andy Kim will come to town, which will mean that he will not be a freshman in the new session. What does he get for that? A bigger office?
He does get a better office. I mean, real estate on Capitol Hill is strictly based on the seniority system. And so the last thing you want is that sort of outside courtyard temporary building that's always available to freshmen. Yeah, I mean, but that's about it. I mean, they're going to have a lot of consistency on committees. Obviously, what's important in New Jersey, and so I think that it'll be interesting to see how that transition goes. The two are decidedly different people, and obviously Andy Kim's going to have his own agenda when it comes to getting into Congress, not just a continuation of Senator Menendez's tenure.
Yeah. Jeannie, we only have 1 minute before we hear from the governor of New Jersey. Will SALT be the preeminent issue for the New Jersey delegation in the new Congress?
It'll be a big one. And listen, Joe, this is close to home for me, so I can't talk about this objectively at all. I certainly hope it is at the top of their list. I say that as a New Yorker. And yes, it may be. And I should add, I think Andy Kim is one of the exciting and up-and-coming Democrats. And I think he's going to have a really fascinating first term there in the Senate.
Well, absolutely. We're going to have a lot more with Jeannie Shanzano and her view from New York, and Rick Davis here in Washington, D.C., coming up a little bit later on this hour. Our second hour, by the way, Kaylee Lyons will be with us. Of course, that starts at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, and we'll have a conversation coming up that hour with Martin O'Malley, the outgoing head of the Social Security Agency. Right now, we turn to my colleagues Romaine Bostic and Scarlett Fu for the interview we told you about with the governor of New Jersey. Let's listen live now, right here on Bloomberg.
Murphy here at our global headquarters in New York City. Governor Murphy, I want to start with a topic that hits close to home, which is congestion pricing in Manhattan. Last week, the MTA approved a revised plan to charge drivers $9 to enter much of the city versus the original $15. You oppose both versions and are fighting it out in court. Are you seeking an emergency ruling to halt implementation? Do you think that you'll be able to stop this?
I can't speak for the judge who's adjudicating here, but we're going to try like heck. It's not that, listen, I think we've got the strongest environmental record of any state in America over the past 7 years. I'm proud of that. We're not against lowering pollution. We're for that. But there's a time, there's a place, there's a deal that works for New Jersey commuters and ones that don't. And this displaces the pollution to New Jersey. It doesn't get rid of it. It's an enormous burden financially on our commuters. And lastly, none of the money comes back on our side of the Hudson, where we've also got transit fiscal challenges.
Right.
So with all due respect to the MTA, we want them to solve their problem within the four walls of the MTA, just like we have with NJ Transit in New Jersey. And perhaps when the gateway tunnels are finished and you've got 4 tunnels with rail tracks as opposed to 2, or when the Port Authority bus terminal is finished, the new one, which we've got both going at long last, there's a time and a place perhaps, but not now.
Okay, I'm going to follow up on a bunch of those questions, but first of all, when it comes to congestion pricing, you have said that you're open to a form of it. What would that plan need to look like for it to gain your support?
I don't have the parameters of it, but it would need to be a reasonable price, discounts that make sense, an amount of money that comes back to Jersey, and a timetable that allows our commuters to look at what their options are. I think that's a reasonable, by the way, what we've asked the federal judge is not, we're not asking for the moon. We're asking that he force the federal administration to do an environmental impact study, and we'll live with the results of that.
Have you had conversations specifically with the governor of New York, Kathy Hochul, as well as the mayor of New York about those issues? And if so, what was their response?
So we've got the good news is we start in a very good place with our relationship with both Eric Adams and Kathy Hochul, and we do an enormous amount with both the city and the state together. Yes, we've spoken person to person, team to team, and this has been a multi-year process. And our ask has always been, let's do an environmental impact study, and at the same time, let's get at the table together. And while that's playing itself out, let's talk about what the contours could be of a deal that we could all live with.
But this congestion pricing plan is more than just about the environment. It's obviously to alleviate congestion as well. The idea that there are just a lot of folks coming into the city that, you know, at least certain people think maybe shouldn't, or they should take public transit into the city. If you don't have the congestion pricing, what is the solution to alleviate the traffic conditions? So
let me say first and foremost, and the MTA wrote this themselves, the number one objective here is to solve their fiscal hole. They've said that themselves. That's it. Don't take my word for it. While congestion and lowering pollution is a noble objective, and it's certainly one of their objectives, it's the number one objective is to solve their fiscal hole. We've got the same challenge at NJ Transit. We've chosen to solve our problems within the 4 walls of New Jersey. We put in a corporate transit fee while New Jersey Transit takes a few years to get back on their fiscal feet, which it will take. All the big transit systems, by the way, in the country are going through a similar reality. We've found a fee, which we don't do lightly, that will allow a bridge to a better fiscal future for them. I don't know what the alternative is for the MTA, but I strongly would like to encourage them to pursue other avenues. As for New York City, we root for New York City. Its success in so many respects is our success. I don't know why, for the life of us, when people are working from home, we're still digging out from a pandemic, why New York City would want fewer people in New York City than more, but that's not my domain.
Let's go back to New Jersey Transit, which you've mentioned a couple of times. Commuters who rely on it, very frustrated by the breakdowns, especially this past summer. You've pledged to fix the system, even if it kills you.
I'm still here. I'm still alive.
You're still alive. You've mentioned this business tax, perhaps, to support NJT. You've also raised fares not so long ago. How much of this is simply a funding problem versus something bigger?
Well, it ultimately will be a big funding problem if we did not find the solutions, and we have found the solutions, which are multi-year. We did not raise fares for 6 years. Longest stretch of fares not being raised ever in New Jersey Transit. We just finally raised them this year. We put in place this corporate transit fee. People, I'm not making an excuse for what we're calling the summer of hell. It was unacceptable to commuters. It was unacceptable to me, period. In fact, we put a free week at the end of the summer just as a tip of the cap to the fact it was a miserable summer. But if you look at the mess we inherited when we first got into office almost 7 years ago, NJ Transit has made a lot of progress on-time performance, safety, customer satisfaction. We don't like anything on those less than 100%, and we will keep fighting until we get there.
Romaine mentioned congestion. Obviously, that's a big goal.
First time I've heard about that.
The Gateway Tunnel project to build those 2 new tunnels under the Hudson River. Donald Trump halted federal funding during his first term. He stalled it, basically. How concerned are you that these funds will be stalled once again or held up or pulled during the second Trump administration?
So first of all, the funds are obligated, and that's a word with heavy definition around federal funding. So that's as close to cement as you get. But having said that, we've found
obligated and dispersed are two different things.
Yeah, but obligated is a big step. Obviously, this is an 8 to 10 year project, so you can't expect that they'll all be dispersed at the moment. Having said that, a big part of the project is the Portal North Bridge, greenlit by Donald Trump as president in June of 2020. I spoke to him last week. That bridge is going to be complete next year, on time and under budget. I asked him if he'd come up and cut the ribbon with me. I don't want to speak for the president, but privately he said he'd very much like to do that. I think he's somebody who understands this region and understands how important infrastructure and moving people and stuff around is. So I'm at this moment with a high degree of confidence. It's a huge union job, building trades, a job source of tens of thousands. I think the president will be in the right place on this.
And you think you'll have a decent working relationship with him for the next year that you're in office?
I mean, we're gonna fight on stuff as we did. When I walk out of here in January of 26, I will have been the longest serving Democratic governor alongside Donald Trump as president. We've already done it for 3 years. We fought like heck on where our values were challenged, our communities were assaulted or challenged, and we'll continue to do so. But that does not mean we will not aggressively look for common ground. I have a good relationship with him personally, and we'll continue to do both.
When you first ran for governor 7 or 8 years ago, you ran on a platform of bringing jobs and bringing companies to New Jersey. What has that progress been? And I am curious if you find yourself in competition with your neighboring states, primarily New York and I guess to a smaller extent Connecticut, in attracting those companies and jobs.
Yeah, so our story is a good one, but it's an incomplete one. We've made an enormous amount of progress on GDP growth, on job creation growth. Our unemployment numbers have been coming into a very good spot. We've got a lot of magnets in place that attract both companies and families. #1 public education system in America.
Do new companies want to set up shop in New Jersey?
You bet. The one area where before we got here we had really lost our way as a state was the startup community. And that's now changing dramatically. We've got these strategic innovation hubs in a number of different fields. Venture capital, we were top 3 in the nation in the first half of this year, behind only California and New York. That's the one area in particular where we had a lot of wood to chop and we've made a lot of progress. We're not there yet. We're not satisfied by any means, but a lot of good progress.
So pharma has a strong foothold in New Jersey, and you're talking about startups as kind of the next big area of growth for the state.
You bet. So life sciences, one of the big innovation hubs is in New Brunswick. It's being built as we speak, called the Helix. That will be a life science focused, both big companies, big hospital systems, Rutgers and Princeton with their research, as well as a big startup component.
Okay, one last question here. New Jersey has long been a true blue state, but Donald Trump won more votes in 2024 than he did in 2020, and the state feels like it's shifting red. There are questions about whether New Jersey is the next battleground state. I wonder if you could talk to that, and also the single most important lesson that you think the Democratic Party must learn from the 2024 election.
I don't see it as a battleground state.
No?
I just don't. That doesn't mean we're complacent about it for 1 second. And you're absolutely right. President Trump's margin was about 5 points in New Jersey. Joe Biden won New Jersey 16-ish points. By the way, if you look at New Jersey, Illinois, Maryland, New York, California. And that doesn't
concern you as a Democrat?
So the big blue states all shifted like that. It concerns me.
Why did it shift, though? Do you know?
A whole number of reasons. I think 12 to 15 individual reasons. It did not impact us down ballot. I would be hyper concerned, and I'm not saying I'm complacent about this because I'm not. We have to be sober, look in the mirror, analyze what happened. But I'd be really panicked if it had a down ballot impact. It did not for the most part. I'll give you an example. He won Passaic County, big Latino and Muslim populations, by the way. He won that county. Democrats had 4 countywide candidates, including 2 newbies. They all won handily. So the lessons, we have to figure out what the lessons are, but we also have to figure out what was at the top of the ticket and lessons that were unique to the top of the ticket versus Democratic Party down ballot lessons.
What's the lesson that's worked for Democrats in New Jersey down ballot that didn't work at the top?
Be on the side of working families, period. We're the #1 state in America to raise a family. That's especially true for working families. Own that space. Invest in it. Be present. And that has worked for us.
Some would say the Democrats did that, certainly at the national level. I can't speak specifically to New Jersey. The issue wasn't whether they did that. The issue was how that was communicated to the voters. And I'm sure you know there were a lot of voters, both Democrats and Republicans alike, who looked at the economy over the last 4 years and did not feel that that investment was there, at least from the Democratic Party.
Yeah, I mean, the notion is that it got too abstract.
Yeah.
Like nice sound bites, but where is it for me? Inflation is still in the system. People are looking, that's the data point that I think matters the most. What am I paying for X today versus 4 years ago?
Is that still the #1 thing you hear from your residents in New Jersey?
I think the economy is still top of the list. It always has been, always will be. The fascinating reality in New Jersey and nationally both is that President Trump got some more votes in New Jersey than he got in 2020. A lot fewer people voted on our side. That to me is the
People sat out the election.
People sat on their hands, both nationally and in New Jersey, and that's something we have to get our arms around. Now, 2020 was an all vote by mail election, record turnout across the board, including in New Jersey, but that's to me the big sobering. Why did you stay home? With so much at stake, how come you sat this one out? That to me is the question we need to get a crisp answer to.
So what is on your to-do list as you get ready, or as a state gets ready for elections next November, to determine whether there's a Democratic governor to follow you up, or perhaps the a Republican governor takes your place?
And so while we have not been a swing state at the presidential level or at the Senate, U.S. Senate level, we have been historically back and forth as governor. So we'll see how that plays out. There's a crowded field on both sides of the aisle, a lot of talent running for governor, so we'll see how that works. I think in terms of us, more of the same. So #1 public education system in America, keep investing in that. Keep expanding pre-K. Make sure you continue to be top 5 healthcare state in America. A big clemency initiative. I want to do parole reform, more broadly criminal justice reform. We got elected to grow the economy, but also to make it a fairer economy, address those inequities. We'll continue to do a lot of
You only have about 1 year left in office.
14 months.
So I assume you're going to be involved in politics post your gubernatorial
I
work?
have no idea.
No?
I have no idea.
All right. It sounds like it. Based on that laundry
public
list
service.
of
Public service is something that I was an ambassador. It's something that that's important to me, and the job of a lifetime has been governor of New Jersey. So I love doing what I can do to serve the public.
Phil Murphy, thank you so much. We've been speaking with New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy, and of course, here with me is Romaine Bostic, my co-anchor from Bloomberg's The Close.
Your favorite.
All right, a deep conversation with the governor of New Jersey. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington, and we thank you for being with us here on Balance of Power. It's the Friday edition, and our signature panel is with us, listening along to Phil Murphy here on Bloomberg as we prepare to welcome our TV audience to the conversation. Jeannie Shanzano.
Up over the last probably 10 years of Republican support for candidates in Bergen County, a key swing county in New Jersey. So I think it is more a migration. But look, everything we've seen politically is Trump and the MAGA movement have put all of that, in super drive. So I wouldn't be surprised if New Jersey isn't more competitive, especially if you see continuing big turnouts. That being said, midterm elections are not a good judge because Republicans have a harder time turning out their vote, and there's less vote in a midterm. So we'll have to wait and see over time. But look, I mean, New Jersey, I think, is one of those states where if you continue to have the migration of working class voters, especially Black and Hispanic and Asian working class voters to the Republican caucus, like what we saw this cycle, which was a Trump phenomena, that could definitely put New Jersey into a state of play for Republican candidates.
Fascinating as we consider what's going on in the state of New Jersey and play it to the nation here. Jeannie, there's one thing, maybe other than China, that seems to bring both sides together. As we just heard from Phil Murphy, it's infrastructure. He just talked about a ribbon cutting with Donald Trump that they're planning for the next couple of weeks or months in New Jersey. Is that something that can keep both sides together in the new Congress?
Let's hope so. Joe Biden made great strides with the infrastructure bill, and Donald Trump was committed to it. He couldn't get it through Congress. So, this is something that we need. You look at this tri-state area, the infrastructure is in disarray. It's getting better, but it's those investments that they were talking about that need to happen. And, the governor made a great point. Nobody knows the challenges of infrastructure in New York and New Jersey better than Donald Trump. It is something he is long familiar with. So the investment there and getting these projects up and running is to the nation and, quite frankly, the world's benefit. And we really need to address them.
All right, Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, our signature panel, with us here on the fastest show in politics. That's just hour one. We've got a lot more ground to cover here, including an important conversation with the man who runs the Social Security Administration. He's on his way out, and he's going to share some thoughts with Kaylee and I coming up next. Martin O'Malley will be with us at the table here on Balance of Power. Stay with us, only on Bloomberg.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
It's known as the third rail of politics, and we're about to touch it. Welcome to the fastest show in politics. As Washington girds for a grand debate over debt and deficits, we sit down with the man who runs the Social Security Administration. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington. Welcome to the Friday edition of Balance of Power here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Kaylee, amid all the talk of tax cuts and deficits and tariffs, very few politicians want to talk about the greatest expense really of them all, and that is Social Security.
Yeah, it certainly is a bear as we try to get our arms around what the deficit picture is going to look like. But also, this is a Democratic Party trying to get its arms around how it moves forward in general after such significant defeats at the presidential level and congressional level as well. And Martin O'Malley would like to be the next chair of the DNC as the party tries to put itself back together again and chart a way forward into 2026 out to 2028, keeping in mind that in the years in between, we're going to be experiencing a second Trump administration, and we have yet to fully understand what that's going to look like as we're still awaiting a few key nominees.
Yeah, and we'll sit down with Laura Davison to talk transition. We have a new name, of course, for Attorney General, and we're still waiting for a Treasury Secretary to come from Mar-a-Lago, Kaylee, so a lot to cover this hour.
And that's why we're watching The Wire, just like Charlie Pellet is watching the charts and these ticks in financial markets as we close out the trading week. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there. Indeed, we are on track for an up week on the S&P 500 index, and right now we are trading very close to session highs for the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ. Right to the numbers with the S&P right now up 20, 59.68 where we stand, up by about 0.3%. Dow Industrials up 352 now, up by 0.8%. NASDAQ up 31, up by 0.2%. Blue chip, small cap stocks advancing in today's day's trading. This year's big tech winners struggled to gain ground. NASDAQ up 30, up by about 0.2%. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares now advancing by 1.6%. 10-year 4.40% with a 2-year that's currently yielding 4.36%. Gold up 1.4%, now 27.07 on the precious metal. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.8%, 71.36 a barrel on crude. Bitcoin continuing to push higher. It is trading now above 99,000. Bitcoin 99,033, up today by 1%. Gap stock soaring 9.9% after raising its full-year outlook as the apparel retailer attracts wealthier shoppers looking for bargains. Among other apparel retailers, Abercrombie & Fitch up 7.4%. Urban Outfitters right now up by 4%. So again, recapping, stocks near session highs, S&P up by about 0.3%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kayla Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet in New York, thank you so much. And of course, here on Bloomberg TV and radio, we were just listening to a conversation out of New York with the governor of New Jersey, Phil Murphy, who was asked by our colleagues Romaine Bostick and Scarlett Fu about specifically what we saw in New Jersey that just took place in November, a rightward shift across a state that, yes, remains blue, but still saw some pretty significant swings. And Joe, this speaks to what we've seen in much of the country as we do the kind of post-election analysis on how exactly the map changed, what propelled Donald Trump to not just a victory, but a popular vote victory, not just an electoral college one. And it's created a lot of questions for the Democratic Party as we're seeing these dynamics and they look forward to 2026 and then to 2028. How do they put themselves back together again or change strategy, change messaging in order to halt that rightward shift that many of the party's strongholds are currently experiencing?
Well, we're sitting down with someone who has an answer to this. Martin O'Malley, the former administrator of the Social Security Administration, former Maryland governor, is making a run for chair of the DNC, and it's great to see you.
Thanks, great to be with
bringing
both of
your
you.
message to us here. You're trying to strike a tone of optimism, and what a lot of Democrats see is a dark time. How do you do it?
Well, I have been talking to so many people all across the country, and everyone's trying to figure out what can we learn from this. Where are the places where we actually got it right, and how can we change so that we can win elections? Because when we lose, everybody loses. So these are the conversations I've been having. And we have to do two things at the same time. We have to rebuild our party, and we have to reconnect with the working people across America who are experiencing a higher cost of living. That's what we need to do. That's always been the core of our party since FDR. It's really acknowledging that the most important place in America is a family's kitchen table. And we became a little bit untethered from that at the national level. But our politics is not the politics of fear. Our politics is the politics of hope, of making sure that working people can feed their kids, can send them to good schools, can retire with dignity and grace. Yeah. So those are the issues that we have to get back to. When we do, we win. Let me give you a few examples, since we're doing, and thank you for calling it, what did you call it? This is not a postmortem. We are not dead. We are going to come back.
Post-election analysis.
Post-election analysis, the after action. Our candidates left it all out on the field, and in some places we were successful. You know, I was talking to Sharif Street in Pennsylvania. I know they just called Senator Casey's election, or he conceded. And at the federal level, Pennsylvania, we were disappointed. We lost that state by 2 points. But at the state level, they kept all of their gains from these years past, so they didn't suffer any reversal in their state house. I was talking to the chair of Alaska. They flipped both of their legislative chambers in Alaska. And Hakeem Jeffries and his caucus were able to gain 6 seats in the House. So when we talk about jobs and opportunity and connect the dots in clear ways so that people can see we are making choices that make their family's future a thing to prefer rather than a thing to dread, then we win elections. And that's what we need to do.
So it sounds like what you're talking about might just be populism, if I could generalize it, something that Donald Trump has really tried to seize on. And I wonder if that means populism is really the only thing that is going to win elections in this modern era.
You know what I would call it? I would call it an economy that works for all of us.
And what's the difference between those descriptions?
And when we have an economy that works for all of us, the democracy supports it. It is very popular. So I guess the difference is this. Look, as a Democrat and a lifelong Democrat, I believe that our economy is not money. It's people. It's all of our people. And the greatness of our country comes from investing in our people and the hope that we see in the eyes of our children and making college more affordable instead of making income more inequitable. When our country worked very, very well and was the envy of the globe, it was because we were investing in a stronger and growing middle class. But we came away from that over the last 40 years. Now I hear the incoming president talking about money and Bitcoin, when instead what the American people want us to talk about is them, the reality around their kitchen table. I am a kitchen table progressive. If we don't deliver the goods of the republic that make a republic worth having, then our party has lost its way.
Yeah, we heard from so many voters during the campaign who told us that it was the kitchen table they wanted to talk about.
Absolutely.
That Democrats had veered into identity politics, and at least they knew Donald Trump had a good economy and no new wars. Those were the two lines that we kept hearing. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I think people across our country actually have a lot more curiosity and interest in talking about our economy and how it works and how it can be made to work better for their home and their kitchen table than a lot of the pundits or the media consultants give them credit for. For example, when I was running for re-election in Maryland as governor, my own consultants told us people don't want it. They're still feeling bad. We're not all the way out of the recession. Don't talk about the economy because they're not feeling great. Just run scary negative ads about the other guy. And I said, hell no, we're not going to do that. We're going to talk about the things that people care about. And we made the economic argument about the things we were doing to make our schools #1 in America, about making college more affordable, all the kitchen table issues, stopping foreclosures. And so, when we engage in an economic debate, people are actually with us. And interestingly, in a state like Missouri, get this, Missouri, up and down their ticket, they have elected officials who are Republicans and were elected. And yet at the referenda on Election Day, their people marched to the polls and they voted for reproductive freedom. Yep. They voted for an increase in the minimum wage, and they voted for paid family leave. So we have to be the party that makes life more affordable for hardworking people who have been worked over for these last 40 years by this false economics of concentrating power, concentrating monopolies, concentrating money in the hands of the few. Our economy is not money. It is people. And that's what we need to speak to as a party.
Well, and the party is comprised of all sorts of people. We've obviously
Thank
spent so
goodness.
much time in the last decade talking about the way in which the Republican Party has morphed in the Donald Trump era, and how there are divisions within that party of those who do follow him and maybe more defined as on the hard right. But we're seeing some of that in the Democratic Party as well, especially as everybody does this post-election analysis, if you will. And so I wonder, as you're making a bid here to lead the party forward, how you fit those pieces back together again so that there's enough cohesion to be able to stick together as a unit.
Yeah, our party is a party that has an enormous amount of diversity. And in fact, our diversity is our strength. But our strength when it comes to winning elections again is to speak to the national interest that we share. And there's nothing more important to the national interest than allowing families to be able to make a better tomorrow for their kids. So that's the thing that unites all of us. All of us have to eat. All of us have to work. All of us want to give our children a better future than the one that we've had. I mean, how sad is it, and what does it say about our country that, when unemployment's at an all-time low, that white male suicides are at an all-time high? There's an enormous fear of change and fear of the future that's gripping our country. And in moments of fear, You know, as Donald Trump said in the past, once asked after the last election, how did you win? He said, I looked into the eyes of those blue-collar people and all across, you know, Pennsylvania and Michigan. I saw their fear, and I tapped into it. So we should not be the party of fear. The leader of our party in modern times said we have nothing to fear but fear itself. This is a time of enormous economic opportunity in the world, the beginnings of a third industrial revolution, the dawn of a third American century. We need to stop fearing the future, embrace it, but we need a strong government that actually works, that delivers, and that has our back. What you're going to see, mark my words, is this administration is going to break a lot of things that Americans
That's
thought.
arguably what people voted for, is it not?
Well, we will see. I don't believe that's true. I believe that Americans, when they heard the message defend democracy, that they heard status quo. And I believe that when they see, I mean, if this administration starts breaking institutions that they had come to rely on and thought could never be broken, whether it's Medicare, whether it's Social Security, whether it's the infrastructure of our nation, they're going to cry out for a government that actually works and has their back. And the Democratic Party is going to have the backs of the working people of this country when we come out and emerge out of these next 2 years. But in the meantime, as a party, look, we need collaborative leadership. We need leadership that has experience in bringing people together, but also in orchestrating change, managing our way out of this as a better and more professional party, but also focusing on the next battlefront. Hakeem Jeffries is the general in that battle of the midterms, but in state offices, state legislatures all across America, county offices, we have to reconnect our national party with those men and women who are experiencing tremendous success in a lot of state houses all across America.
Voters who are not experiencing tremendous success. You talk about those scary ads. A lot of them worked, especially those that highlighted transphobia. And there's a Democrat from Massachusetts who we talk to pretty often here named Seth Moulton. He made big headlines saying that Democrats went wrong by leaning too far into identity politics. You may agree with him or not. But what does your DNC, if you get this job, look like when it comes to protecting or looking out for marginalized communities like trans?
We will make no compromise when it comes to our principles. And those core principles are our belief in the dignity of every person and our belief in the common good that we share as Americans. As I looked at the ads that were being run, it seemed that it was actually the other party that was obsessed with trying to divide us and trying to belittle transgendered people. It's the other party who came back to Congress, and their very first act was about bathroom bills in an era when so many places have unisex, restrooms. What do unisex restrooms or not have to do with putting food on your table or educating your kids or keeping a roof over their head? We have to not allow ourselves to become juked, distracted by the politics of division and fear. Our politics is the politics that says we are one, our cause is one, we have to help each other if we are to succeed, and we need to build an economy and a country that works for all of us, not just for some of us.
Well, obviously, right now, the U.S. economy and everything that has been built in large part has been underpinned by a growing deficit and debt problem, which it felt like in a lot of ways neither candidate was really willing to outwardly talk about on the campaign trail, in part because there's just things you can't touch politically, like Social Security, which obviously you're intimately familiar with, and Medicare. Defense is hard to touch as well. And I just wonder, no matter what party is in charge in the years to come, if you see a way in which the country can find itself on a more sustainable path.
Sure. I mean, one of the things that's happened in our country for the last, 30 years or more has been a great reduction in the amount of income tax that our highest earners pay. If we were to merely return to a level that was what we had as a nation during the first term of Ronald Reagan, I mean, a lot of those things would start to be addressed and would be addressed over time. Let me say, before I talk about Social Security, that I am here in my personal capacity. I am not here in my capacity as Commissioner of Social Security. However, I do know enough about that math to be able to tell you Social Security does not contribute to the national debt. It is a pay-as-you-go system, which means that as Americans pay into Social Security, those of us that are still working age, we pay out the benefits like an insurance company. So last year, 1.35 trillion came in from people working, 1.37 trillion went out to people who are retired and beneficiaries, and the difference came from the surplus reserve that was built up to cover this era of the baby boomers. That reserve is running out sooner. That surplus reserve is running out sooner than anticipated, and the reason is income inequality. In other words, in 1982, they thought they were setting a level of Social Security cap that would capture 90% of earnings in America. Instead, with all of the things that drove income out of most American homes and into the hands of the top 6%, that also reduced the bracket, if you will, so it only applied to 80% of income in America. So a simple solution to that is to ask people who make more to start contributing again. There's no cap on what people contribute to Medicare, and Social Security is doesn't contribute a dime to the national debt. It is a self-sustaining program. That doesn't mean that this new crowd can't break it. If they want to break it, they can break it. But that's not what 80% of Americans want.
Sure.
They want Social Security expanded and strengthened so that it's there not only in their lifetimes, but for their kids and their grandkids, which is also the same hopes and dreams they have for their nation.
All right, sir, thank you so much for joining us. Martin O'Malley, of course, knows Social Security very well, but he is also running to be the next chair of the DNC. Appreciate you joining us here in our Washington, D.C. studio, and we'll have more straight ahead on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's 121 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We've got stocks trading very close to session highs, on track for an up week. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing. S&P right now up 20, a gain of just about 0.4%. Dow Industrials up 341 for the Dow, a gain right now of 0.8%. NASDAQ up 41, that is a gain of 0.2%. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares, the outperformer, up 1.7%. 10-year 4.40% with a 2-year 4.36%. Gold right now up $40 the ounce, up 1.5%. Crude West Texas Intermediate 71.30 a barrel. Bitcoin up 1%, 99,070 on Bitcoin. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcast. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington once again. Your hosts Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet in New York, thank you so much. Here in Washington, we've been looking for some answers in the last 24 hours after the news that Matt Gaetz was taking himself out of contention for Attorney General. We know that Donald Trump has now nominated the former Florida Attorney General, Pam Bondi, to replace him, at least as nominee. But we had another question, Joe, which was, what does Matt Gaetz' political future then look like? Will he try to take his seat in the 119th Congress? And according to an interview he did with Charlie Kirk, the answer to that question is no. He's not planning on returning to the House. So we've got one question answered, but we still have a lot more we're looking for answers.
We do. We still don't have a Treasury Secretary
Right.
pick. We're told that could be any time or after Thanksgiving. And then there's this idea, as we drill down into this idea, keep me honest here, the Treasury two-step, we'll call it. You put Kevin Warsh in as Treasury Secretary. You keep him there until he becomes Fed Chair when Jay Powell's term ends. All the while, Scott Bessent is in the White House chairing the National Economic Council, and he becomes Treasury Secretary when Warsh goes to the Fed. Did I do it?
Yeah, that's what the Wall Street Journal has reported, right?
That's exactly the report today.
Yeah.
That has tongues wagging in Washington. And we wanted to talk to Laura Davison about this, Bloomberg Politics editor. Are we just keeping ourselves busy, waiting for a name to drop here, or is this a real concept at Mar-a-Lago?
This is an idea that's being considered when they're looking at the Treasury role. They're looking at the broader suite of economic jobs, and they're trying to get a team that's cohesive. You know, we saw in some cases that people didn't want to work for Howard Lutnick, for example. So people said, no, I won't take the NEC job. If he's going to be Treasury Secretary. So there's a lot of jockeying, and not just like I want this certain title, but also who are going to be the people around me in that specific role. So that's a lot of what's happening here. But also, Trump is not satisfied with the choices he has. There's no one perfect candidate, and that's why we're seeing this drag on, and we could potentially see new names or even surprise names crop up into the mix here.
I think it's fascinating that it's taken this long to figure out Treasury, and it could take much longer still. We don't know timeline here. Whereas Matt Gaetz drops out, and less than 12 hours later, he already has a new name on the list for AG ready to go. So clearly there were ideas in place here, backup plans, as there was perhaps writing on the wall for Matt Gaetz. But does that not mean there's not backup plans to the backup plans if he doesn't like the Treasury options that have been presented to him thus far?
We're on the backup plans right now. So Mark Rowan and Kevin Warsh, those are people who were not in the initial discussions, brought them down there this week. But those interviews were days ago. There's still meetings happening. They're still trying to figure everything out. And there's just, you basically have an internal conflict here of Trump wants someone who is a Wall Street person, who has the pedigree and the experience, but also is MAGA. And those things are oftentimes at odds.
Pete Hegseth making the rounds yesterday in the Senate. He did have an answer to the charges that have been levied against him. A police report came out detailing this sexual assault case that he paid money to settle. He says that they decided not to file charges, and that's the end of the story. Is it?
We'll find out. 2 months is a really long time. There could be a drip of allegations that continue to come out here. Trump is basically daring the Republican senators, saying, "Look, defy me." But we saw that Republicans, in the Senate are not afraid. They said no to Matt Gaetz, and they could say no to someone else. So this is really going to be sort of the key one to watch here. It looks like some of the others, perhaps Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr. may get by. They're a little bit more qualified from a At least that's what Republican senators are saying. If you look at the resumes of a lot of these people, they don't necessarily have the experience that one would traditionally have. But I think there's widespread recognition among Republicans in the Congress that they can't, say no to 3 or 4 or 5 of these picks.
So is the prevailing thinking here that John Thune essentially used his one free pass to tank a nominee, even though he didn't really? Matt Gaetz had to take himself out, or that there still could be a free pass yet to go for one of these other controversial nominees?
This is really what remains to be seen here, and I think what the specific circumstances and facts on the ground and allegations are. Everything that was swirling around Matt Gaetz was really bad, and there was also this House Ethics Committee report that contained more, and clearly Gaetz did not want to have that out there. So this is I think the facts and circumstances may matter here. If there are more details or things that come out that are problematic, Thune may have more leverage. But the fact that he was willing, he just got the job, not just a couple days ago, but this week, was already willing to say no, indicates that this might be emblematic of his leadership style.
Mm-hmm. Laura Davison, thank you so much. Bloomberg Politics editor on this Friday. Just imagine what the weekend could bring. I hope it's not a work.
She does not want to imagine that, I think.
Laura's been great with us
None
in
of
the
us
clutch
do.
here. No, absolutely not. Nothing will happen until Monday. You heard it here first. Headlines have been flying, though. This has been quite a time for our politics team. We spent some time just yesterday talking with Mikey Sherrill, a congresswoman from New Jersey, Democrat. She's running for governor. Her ideas on this Hegseth matter as a veteran of the Navy.
Yeah, a former female Navy helicopter pilot told us this.
Look, if you sort of attacked women's service in the way he has, that would be really concerning to any commanding officer in the fleet right now. We have built so much, and it has continued to make us a strong, resilient force, and I would hate to see a Secretary of Defense that had as his agenda and goal tearing that apart.
Let's turn now to our signature political panel. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are back with us. Rick, of course, Bloomberg Politics contributor and partner at Stone Court Capital. Jeannie, Bloomberg Politics contributor and political science professor at Iona University. What's your thought on this today, Jeannie, now that we've had a little bit of time for this to settle? Pete Hegseth making the rounds in the Senate with this scandal hanging over his head and an idea that we should bar women from combat roles like the one that Mikey Sherrill had.
Yeah, there's been time now. We've had several people go back and read. Pete Hegseth is the author of 4 books that have been bestsellers, and he has said a lot that's controversial in those books. People have been reading through those. And, with 2 months to go potentially before he gets to a hearing, if it gets that far, how much more can come out and be chewed over? I think your conversation with Mikey Sherrill is absolutely on point. He is going to have to defend these views, or he's going to have to pivot, and he's going to do it in front of senators, including vets, including female senators who are vets, who have given their lives for the military. So he's going to have a lot of explaining to do. And that doesn't even start to get to the police report. That is pretty damning as well.
Well, yeah. So, Rick, would love for you to weigh in here, because if we look back at history and the things that have taken down candidates for nominations like this in the past, perhaps you could see a number of things that would have previously been found to be disqualifying, whether it was these character questions or just a question of experience. Not to diminish his service. He, of course, has served in the National Guard, and he's done tours of duty, and yet he hasn't actually been a leader in the way we typically see of Defense Department nominees. And we're talking about the United States military here, the greatest fighting force in the world.
Yeah, I think that most of the time when I've seen cabinet, sub-cabinet members who require Senate confirmation, ambassadors wind up not getting through a confirmation, it's mostly personal issues. It's not paying taxes, having a nanny that is undocumented and not paying taxes, personal issues related to the law. It's very rarely lack of experience. There have been plethora of cabinet members who've served well, who were sort of thrust into leadership roles and did fine. And I would say, there's a very simple answer to this Hegseth question about women in the military is that's not the policy he's going to make. The White House is going to make that policy. And when you look at all the work that's been done around this transition, whether it's, AFPI, a think tank that's been writing on this 2025. None of them have been recommending taking women out of combat roles, and so I'd be very surprised if the White House, is going to adopt a Hegseth view, or if Hegseth's going to adopt the White House view, which is his job. So there are a lot of controversial people in this cabinet. Tulsi Gabbard's comments about Syria and Iran and Russia, much more sort of inflammatory than that. And, RFK Jr., let's not even go there. We'd have 100 days of talking about every controversial remark he's had in the healthcare field that will now relate to his tenure as head of HHS. So there's plenty to chew on here, but I doubt if any of it's going to rise the level of disqualification.
How about Pam Bondi? Jeannie, this is the name, of course, that Donald Trump announced shortly after Matt Gaetz withdrew for Attorney General. First female Attorney General in Florida, elected in 2010, tried unsuccessfully to overturn the Affordable Care Act, declined to take legal action against Trump University, and served on the team defending Donald Trump in his first impeachment. If Matt Gaetz was the man to break or shake up the DOJ, what will she mean for the agency?
She has a much stronger record, obviously, 8 years, to your point, as an AG of one of the largest states in the country. She's been a prosecutor for many years. But as it pertains to America First, she very much seems to, at least as far as we know, agree with Matt Gaetz. So there will be plenty of questions for her. But of course, she doesn't come with all the baggage. You didn't mention, Joe, that people are starting to call her Legally Blondie, which may be the moniker that sticks with her. But I think she is probably, unless something comes out that we don't know about yet, going to sail through this confirmation process, and she is going to be able to work to do the bidding of Donald Trump in the way that Matt Gaetz had talked about, but without all that baggage. It's not going to impede her confirmation process, as far as we can tell.
Did it have to be another person from Florida? Rick, you replaced Florida with Florida after you've already pulled from Florida before. What's all this about?
Yeah, it's going to be awful tough to get a reservation in a Palm Beach restaurant by the time this group gets its first break. I think she's the maybe sixth resident of Florida to be appointed to the cabinet or sub-cabinet level, and a former employee of Brian Ballard, who I think premier lobbyist in Florida, Susie Wiles' partner. And it looks like he's going to have quite a franchise in Washington, D.C. over the course of the next 4 years. So, it's definitely a Florida-centric administration. And you better make your Christmas plans early if you plan to get a hotel room down in Palm Beach.
Yeah, we started calling Florida, like Southern Florida, Wall Street South. It's going to be Pennsylvania Avenue South also.
That's right. The Breakers administration.
Or maybe the White House is Florida North.
Indeed.
I don't know.
I'm fine with that. We need some palm trees in our life. It's getting chilly around here.
Yeah, it was snowing in Washington earlier today. I don't know if Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano got to experience it, but we're glad, as always, to experience another conversation with our signature political panel, and we still have more ahead here on Balance
You said
of
it.
Power.
In fact, we're going to talk a lot more about this pick for Attorney General with Dave Ehrenberg, Palm Beach State's Attorney. He won't be at the Breakers, but he'll be right here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got stocks holding at or near session highs on this Friday, on track for a winning week on the S&P. Right now, looking at a gain of 17 points, up by about 0.3%. Dow Jones Industrial Average up 353 points, up 0.8, while NASDAQ is up 22 for the NASDAQ Composite Index. That is a gain right now of about 0.1%. NASDAQ 100 Index also up 0.1%, but the outperformer, the Russell 2000 Index of small cap shares, up now by 1.6%. The 10-year 4.41% with a 2-year 4.36%. Gold up $40 the ounce, back above 2,700, 27.10 right now on gold, up 1.5%. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.7%, 71.28 a barrel. Bitcoin at 99,143. Bitcoin up right now by 1.8%, up by 1.1%. Earnings news, Gap stock surging after last night's report, now up by 11%. It did raise its full-year outlook. Other apparel retailers also higher. Case in point, Abercrombie & Fitch, A&F up by 8% right now. Urban Outfitters pushing higher by 4%. So again, recapping, S&P up by 0.3%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington, the Friday edition, with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. Rounding out the trading week for us as we round out the week here in politics, marking a little bit over, 2 weeks since Election Day here on Balance of Power. I'm Kaylee Lyons alongside Joe Matthew. And even though Election Day was well over 2 weeks ago, we still have a few outstanding House races that have yet to be called. And we did still have one question when it came to the Republican majority in the Senate. And that was, would it stay 53? And Dave McCormick have his victory in Pennsylvania confirmed over the incumbent Bob Casey? We got that one answered yesterday. That's true. As Bob Casey, who is the incumbent Democrat, conceded that race.
We heard from Bob Casey. Of course, this is a 3-term senator from a family with a long political legacy in the state of Pennsylvania. Remembering, David McCormick is already here in Washington for Senate orientation. Here's Senator Casey from yesterday.
I just called Dave McCormick to congratulate him on his election to represent Pennsylvania in the United States Senate. As the first count of ballots is completed, Pennsylvanians can move forward with the knowledge that their voices were heard, whether their vote was the first to be counted or the last. This race was one of the closest in our Commonwealth's history, decided by less than 1/4 of a point. I'm grateful to the thousands of people who worked to make sure that every eligible vote cast could be counted.
Let's go to our expert on politics in Pennsylvania. That would be Jonathan Tamari at Bloomberg Government, from where he hails, now in Washington, of course. Jonathan, speak to the significance of this concession, why it took so long, and what 53 seats will mean for Republicans.
Yeah, I mean, it's a significant upset for Republicans. When you looked at the map, Democrats knew it was going to be a very tough year for them, defending a lot of seats. But one of the incumbents who they thought was in danger, but who had probably one of the best chances of surviving, was Bob Casey, just given his family's history in Pennsylvania, his own electoral history as a 3-term senator, before that a state auditor and other positions in statewide office. And yet Dave McCormick pulled off the win. He managed to unseat somebody who a lot of people thought could not be beaten. And so it's a really significant upset for Republicans. You know, the reason I think it took so long, it was within 0.5 percentage point, which is the margin for an automatic recount in Pennsylvania. And I think there's a lot of sensitivity in Pennsylvania about making sure all the votes are counted, given that in 2020 there was an effort by Donald Trump and others to stop counting votes in Pennsylvania before they could be completed and before the results there could actually be known. So I think there's a certain sensitivity that Bob Casey was responding to. And look, he's never really been on this side of things in a general election, so it might have taken him some time to come to grips with losing. As far as Republicans go, though, having 53 seats, it's a huge benefit. It means they can lose 3 votes and still confirm Donald Trump's nominees with J.D. Vance as the tie-breaking vote. Gives them a lot of wiggle room, even if someone like Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, who are 2 moderates who, you know, at times gone against the Trump agenda, decide to oppose some nominees, they still have enough votes to get those people through and to get their agenda through. So it's a significant edge, especially when you consider how much trouble Democrats had with having only 51 votes. And, you know, we saw over and over people like Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema block things that a lot of other Democrats wanted.
Well, so as you mentioned, Manchin and Sinema, Jonathan, I do wonder who that equivalent will now be for the Republican majority. Is it going to be Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, potentially the outgoing majority leader or Republican leader who would have been the majority leader but decided not to seek the role, Mitch McConnell?
Yeah, I think those are three important people to keep an eye on. Certainly, Collins and Murkowski have already done it. Like, part of their political brands are being independent and defying their party at times. They opposed the Affordable Care Act repeal during the first Trump administration, so we've already seen them do it. McConnell, though, is something of a wild card, as we wrote about today. He's an interesting character because he has spent 2 decades as the leader of the party in the Senate. His job was to basically unite Republicans, to speak for the conference as a whole. And so basically he had to be a party person. But now he's stepping down. He doesn't have that responsibility. He most likely isn't going to run for re-election. So he doesn't have to worry about his political prospects. And we know that he sees things very differently from Donald Trump, particularly when it comes to national defense and alliances overseas. So, you know, he's someone who a fellow senator said to us could be liberated by this change. And he's certainly someone to watch. There's already reporting that he was one of the Republicans holding out against Attorney General nominee Matt Gaetz, and that may have been part of the reason that Gaetz had to withdraw his nomination.
All right, Jonathan, we thank you so much. Jonathan Tamari, Bloomberg Government, with us on Bloomberg TV and radio with our eyes on the U.S. Senate. Kaylee, senators are going to be in the position to start voting on confirmations, up or down, on a large team that Donald Trump has assembled. It will not include Matt Gaetz.
Yep.
It will include Pam Bondi.
That's right. Someone else who's from Florida. She, of course, did a few rounds as the Attorney General of that state. And our next guest is someone who actually knows her pretty well, and that is the Palm Beach County State Attorney, Dave Ehrenberg, who is here with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. Welcome back to Balance of Power. Dave, would love just your hot take on this pick, which, might I add, was made very quickly after Matt Gaetz announced he was withdrawing his consideration.
So
We're talking less than 12 hours here.
He likes us Floridians. And Pam Bondi.
Yeah, clearly.
Haley and Joe, good to be with you. Pam Bondi is a loyalist, someone that he doesn't have to worry about going off the reservation. But at the same time, she's on Team Normal. She's no Matt Gaetz. She's not ultra MAGA. She's not going to engage in crazy conspiracy theories. She's not going to walk Tony Fauci out of his house in an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs. But she will be loyal to Donald Trump. I know Pam well. She does believe in the rule of law. She treats her people well. There will not be mass resignations in the Department of Justice. She will get confirmed through the U.S. Senate. She is liked by people on both sides of the aisle who know her. And I think it was actually a smart pick by Donald Trump, especially because in the wake of the Matt Gaetz disaster, he didn't waste any time in finding someone who will do his agenda by going after undocumented migrants, fentanyl at the border, and other things. She'll do some controversial things. She'll do some popular things. But at least she's just not going to weaponize the DOJ to trump up, for lack of a better word, false cases, fake cases to try to go after Trump's enemies.
Interesting when you consider the idea of loyalty in some of these picks. And I wonder your thoughts on this. Bondi declined to take legal action against Trump University, even after receiving nearly 24 complaints in her office in 2013. She also joined the team defending Donald Trump during his first impeachment. How will that inform the way she takes directives from the president-elect?
She is loyal to Donald Trump. He wouldn't have appointed her otherwise. But it's not the first time we've seen a loyalist as Attorney General. Bill Barr was supposed to be a loyalist, and he was for most of his term. JFK had his own brother as Attorney General, so it's not that unusual. And as for the $25,000 contribution that Trump made to Pam Bondi's campaign, remember, there's a natural tension when you have to run for office as a state attorney general. You have to go to your supporters and ask for money. She did that to Donald Trump. He wrote the check and signed it days before there was an article that came out about the investigation into Trump University in New York. So there is no evidence that there was a quid pro quo because the check was written and signed before the article came out, which is what informed Pam Bondi and her team that there was this investigation going on. Plus, when you mention a couple dozen complaints, yes, but those complaints don't go to her office. They go to the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. And although 24 complaints is not insignificant in a huge state like Florida, it's not going to rise to the level of the Attorney General's office taking action until there's more or until they're notified about it in a different way. And one more thing on that, her office turned over at the time 8,000 pages of documents to show that there was no communication between her office and Donald Trump about Trump University. So yes, I admit the timing doesn't look good, but as far as evidence of quid pro quo and bribery, there is none.
Well, so as we consider here the role that the Attorney General has leading the Department of Justice overall, there's also the consideration of what falls underneath that very large umbrella, Dave, like, for example, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And I wonder what this pick, if anything, suggests to you about the way in which we may see those other choices shaped by the president-elect.
It depends who he's able to pick now. The fact that he's going to terminate Chris Wray is troubling because you're supposed to get a 10-year term. You're supposed to be insulated from politics. So that's bad enough. But then to try to remove him in favor of Kash Patel, that's ultra MAGA. That's taking loyalists a step further. That's a Matt Gaetz type pick. If he picks Mike Rogers from Michigan, that's a little more like team normal. So it depends who he picks, in addition to the fact that he'll be doing something he's not supposed to do and getting rid of Chris Wray. So we'll see what happens there. But I do see Pam Bondi as a bit of a guardrail because, as someone who knows her and has worked with her, she does believe in the rule of law. And I think that whatever she does, she'll tether it to the rule of law. She doesn't want to lose her bar license or get incarcerated like Mike Nifong, the prosecutor of the Duke lacrosse case, who went rogue. She knows better. She's been a 20-year prosecutor. She was an 8-year attorney general. So although she will support the Trump agenda, she's not going to do something that she believes is illegal for him.
Suggesting that she would stand up to Donald Trump if necessary. If that's the case, the far cry from Matt Gaetz. So net here, Pam Bondi will not break the Department of Justice is your message today, Dave Ehrenberg.
Yes, she's a loyalist, and she is at the same time someone who's a career prosecutor, who's got experience, who's qualified, and who believes in the rule of law. She is not going to take this job to burn the place down. Matt Gaetz promised to burn the place down. That's a big difference. And for my fellow Democrats who are saying, well, there should be a better choice, Sally Yates ain't walking through that door. Eric Holder is not going to be appointed by Donald Trump. So if you're talking about the kind of candidate who Donald Trump will nominate for Attorney General, it won't get better than Pam Bondi.
Dave, just quickly before we let you go, we have about a minute left here. We also learned today that the judge in Donald Trump's New York hush money case, in which he was convicted on 34 felony counts, Juan Merchan, has agreed to postpone his sentencing that was supposed to happen next week indefinitely. I wonder if you think that is A, the right move, and if B, that means he's never actually going to get sentenced in this case.
No, it was to be expected, Kaylee. I would have been surprised if he sentenced him just weeks before he entered the White House. I mean, Judge Merchan doesn't want to look like he's weaponizing his position. And also, he knows that Trump is going to appeal anyways, and that will stay his sentence. So why sentence him now when there's going to be many months of appeals as he goes all the way up to the Supreme Court, claiming he had immunity? And the court should never have admitted the evidence of a couple of his aides, Mallory Westerhout and Hope Hicks, into evidence. So the Supreme Court's going to deal with that. So I think you and I and Joe should check back in January of 2029 when we can see the sentencing hearing. By then, of course, we could be living on Mars by then. We don't know. Or,
That's true.
Kaylee, you'll be owning Bloomberg TV by then. We don't know, but that will happen one day.
Is that in the cards? You're buying Bloomberg TV?
Okay, let's not get me in trouble with management here.
Listen, this is important because it's coming from the center of the political universe, which is Palm Beach. Dave Ehrenberg, thank you so much for being with us. Palm Beach County State Attorney, a friend of Pam Bondi. By the way, while we're talking transition, Kaylee, we've got another report. This is not officially from the Trump camp, but a new name for Ag Secretary.
That's right, Kelly Loeffler, the former senator who, of course, lost after she was named to fill that seat. She lost the actual seat in Georgia in 2021, but she is expected to be named the Secretary of Agriculture. We're still waiting for Treasury, though, and we'll give you another update at 5 p.m. here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I will show you how to get the best funding for your startup idea. Let's get started. Here's the deal. If you have an amazing startup idea and need funds to fuel it, we're here to help. Simply send us a video where you explain your idea. Make it clear, concise, and compelling. Hook us in with your passion and vision. Don't forget to include your contact details so investors can reach out directly. This is your chance to shine and get your idea in front of people who can make it a reality. Imagine turning your startup dream into a thriving business. It all starts with that one simple step. So what are you waiting for? Grab your phone, hit record, and let your idea fly. The future of your startup could be just one video away. Remember, be clear, be passionate, and most importantly, be you. We can't wait to see what you've got. Let's get funded now.
is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Carol Masser and what's his name? Tim Stenevec. They are out today, coming back from the Schwab conference in San Francisco. I'm here, Matt Miller, in the Bloomberg Business Week studio with Emily Grafeo, and we have a lot to talk about today.
We do. Tim and Carol gave us some news yesterday with that interview with the Schwab CEO talking about crypto.
There's some there, and we're going to cover crypto, as I said, with SMI in just a moment. We're also going to talk about how rich people can avoid taxes. AQR is finding new and novel ways for rich people to pay less.
I never knew that rich people were able to do that, Matt.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating, and I mean, probably a lot of rich people listening, so you can take notes. The CFO of Home Depot is going to join us, which I'm really looking forward to today. And we're going to talk about the U.S. consumer and holiday spending. Katie Thomas from the Carney Consumer Institute has a study of 14,000 shoppers.
We're also going to be talking about early stage investing in high growth category defining companies. We have Jenny Rook, founder of Genoa Ventures, a little bit later in the program.
All right, right now let's get over to Charlie Pellet. He's going to give us the lay of the land with the markets to kick it off. Charlie?
Thank you very much, Matt Miller. We are higher across the board. The big question, though, is Bitcoin going to hit 100K on our watch today? Keep it locked into Bloomberg for the very latest. Right now we got the Dow up 349. That is a gain of 0.8%. S&P up 16, up 0.3%. NASDAQ up 21, higher by 0.1%. The Russell 2000 index surging 1.7%. 10-year 4.40% with a 2-year right now 4.36%. Spot gold up $40 the ounce, up 1.5% now at 27.10. WTI West Texas Intermediate crude back above 71, up 1.7%. And Bitcoin now at 99,321, on track for a record close again, up another 1.3%. Blue chip small cap shares advancing in today's trading. This year's big tech winners struggling to gain ground. Gap soaring after it raised its full year outlook as the apparel retailer attracts wealthier shoppers looking for deals. Gap stock up 11% right now among other apparel retailers. They're rallying as well. Abercrombie & Fitch up by 8.1%. Urban Outfitters up now by 4.2%. Recapping, Bitcoin at 99,360. The S&P up 0.3%. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Charles, thanks very much for that. I forgot to mention, Emily, we are going to cover Trump's cabinet picks as well.
Yes.
If you're not sick of hearing about it, we're going to...
Maybe people are just tuning in.
We're going to debate who will be Treasury Secretary once again. We do it every hour, 24/7. But right now, let's focus in on Bitcoin. 99,000, I think Charlie said 300 and change. And Stacey Maria Ishmael is here in the Bloomberg Business Week studio with us. She is the executive editor for cross-asset coverage, as well as Bitcoin and fintech. And Stacey Marie, you know, this big round number, we're kind of going up and bouncing off of it, not quite making it there, but it often happens with psychological. Exactly. What do you make of the trade?
Well, this time last year, Bitcoin was trading at less than $40,000. So, you know, I think the big round number aside, the reality is this does look like a pretty sustainable leg up in the market, whether we get to 100K or not. And now I think everybody's just trying to figure out what will be future drivers of similar rallies.
How would you describe what's brought us to this $99,000, 99 and change level that we're already at? Is it just all, you know, post-election people getting excited about Trump in the White House?
No, people started getting excited in January of this year when the SEC greenlit, even if grudgingly, the existence of, you know, spot Bitcoin ETFs. We had another leg up in around March or April when it finally looked like some kind of interest rate, a lower interest rate environment would, you know, generally benefit risk assets, of which digital assets absolutely are perceived as a risk asset. And then later this year, getting into early fall, so September here in the US, when it did look like, you know, Trump's odds, at least on Polymarket, were pointing him towards the victor in the election, that we started to see that real run up. And then, of course, on November 5th and 6th itself. And now here we are.
What is your take, by the way? Little curveball question here.
Love a curveball.
What is your take on the betting markets? I mean, the polls have been wrong since Brexit, right? But betting markets, I'm not sure if they point us in the right direction. They're right minutes before usually the result. But this election season, they seemed pretty good.
Yeah, I do want to point to something that our colleague John Authors wrote a couple of days ago. He did a very deep dive into what Polymarket got right and what it got less right, shall we say. But I think the broader point is, if you care about sample sizes, if you care about demographics, if you care about people who aren't just the ones that have crypto wallets and know how to bet on things like Polymarket, then you should put a little bit more say in polls. And at least as it relates to the election, it's not that the polls weren't like categorically wrong. There was absolutely some categorically wrong polls. But Polymarket's enthusiasm for Trump tended to slightly lag some of the other polling that we were seeing, and there were still cases in which, there were people who were betting on a Harris victory even when it became clear that that didn't seem possible.
You can type NI authors on the terminal to get all of John's work. And definitely worth reading that column. I checked it out as well. Back to Bitcoin. I know, we went from 1,000 to 10 in like 11 months. And it took us 7 years to get from 10 to 100,000. What are the targets you're hearing from the sources that you and your team talk to?
I mean, the truly Bitcoin to the moon people are like, 1 million is the next big number, which, sure, there are more zeros in 1 million. But I think the enthusiasm is coalescing around like a 200K number, which again would be a doubling of where we are today. And the arguments are as follows. Under a Trump presidency, you're going to have a regulatory environment that is a lot more explicitly friendly to crypto. There's the possibility, as we have scooped, that there may well be some kind of crypto czar with a direct line to, positions of decision-making power over financial markets. There is the likelihood that new and more retail-friendly Bitcoin, Solana, Ether types of products get approved. There's the possibility that, Schwab, as you mentioned, and other very traditional financial services firms might offer more crypto products. There's a possibility that the US might have a strategic Bitcoin reserve and, collect 5% of the world's Bitcoin at a time. And so for all of these folks, they see nothing but tailwinds. Like they fully expect that the momentum is going to be on the side of digital assets.
What was interesting to me was that yesterday, when it was announced that Gary Gensler would step down in January as chair of the SEC, I thought that was going to push Bitcoin up to 100K, and it didn't. I'm wondering if you think that, all of that anticipation is already priced in.
Yeah, we love a priced in. But I do think for Gensler, it was one of Trump's first and most explicit promises to the crypto crowd. He was at the Bitcoin conference in Nashville. He was like, I'm going to fire that guy. And so whether it came down as, the administration was going to find a way to get rid of the people that it didn't think were friendly to the cause, or folks would self-select out of it, like those things do seem to be coming to pass as people had expected.
Who could be the Bitcoin czar, the crypto czar? I always thought it would be fun if Roger Ver, if they brought him in.
The Bitcoin Jesus?
Yes, because he's
a little bit busy right now.
Yeah, but Trump could pardon him, and he loves the power of the pardon. Of course, Ver had gone, on the wrong side of the fork for most people to Bitcoin Cash. Is there anybody in the running? Is this idea fully fleshed out, do you think, in the Trump circles? Or
I mean, the fun game right now in crypto circles is like, who hasn't put themselves forward for this position? Like anybody who is in a position of either executive or lobbying ability, because there are some very well-funded crypto lobbying groups and various folks at different firms. I would say people are looking at who has donated the most money to the campaign recently. There were some fairly large crypto donations, $300,000, $500,000 from individuals in crypto, and that certainly makes it more likely that they will at least be considered for the role.
All right, Stacey Marie, great having you in the studio. Thank you so much for joining us on this Friday afternoon. Stacey Marie Ishmael runs our coverage of Bitcoin as well as cross-asset reporting and fintech. It's a pretty big beat, I'd say. You deserve a weekend. Someone who probably won't get a weekend once again is Gregory Cordy in Washington, D.C., White House reporter covering the Trump cabinet appointments, and we bring him in right now. Gregory, we're just talking with Stacey Marie about the potential for a Bitcoin czar. I don't know if you have any intel on that, but I know you all have been covering around the clock the potential Treasury Secretary. Do we know any more than we did this morning? Are we any closer than maybe it's Warsh until he gets to move on to the Fed and then Bessent comes from the NEC?
Yeah, we're still on Treasury watch, minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day, and we've been hearing for many days that it could come at any moment now. My hunch is that it would probably come after a market close. Trump likes to work into the night and has not been shy about announcing cabinet picks up until midnight some nights. So it could come at an off hour, or it could even come over the weekend. Last weekend he had a number of cabinet picks. So not much more on the timing, except that, look, this is a position that President-elect Trump wants somebody in who is both competent but also can play to the big promises that he made to his MAGA base to really be disruptive in terms of the economy, and that's been a tough circle to square. Trying to find exactly the right mix there in any one candidate. So you mentioned Scott Bessent, Kevin Warsh, Mark Rowan from Apollo. His name has been floated recently as well, or it could be somebody else that isn't even on our radar screen right now.
But we went through the whole campaign thinking it would be Scott Bessent, and I've heard Bessent or Bessent. I'm not 100% clear. Do you speak French, Emily?
I've heard both interpretations.
In any case, we know Scott, right? And because he was writing like Trump's campaign speeches, the MAGA base likes him. Steve Bannon has come out in support of Bessent. If it weren't for Howard Lutnick, trying to throw him under the bus and grab the job for himself, wouldn't we already have him appointed as Treasury Secretary? Isn't that, the simplest way to go?
Yeah, you may have put your finger on it, is in that there was a little bit of palace intrigue here with Howard Lutnick. He's running the president's transition. He wanted the job as well. Reportedly, Trump got a little frustrated by this infighting. Trump is somebody who likes for people to audition for jobs. He ran he was on a primetime television show where the whole premise was people would come in and beg for a job with him, right? And so he likes that up to an extent. For whatever reason, it became all too much, and he started looking at other alternatives. Howard Lutnick since has moved over to the Commerce job, which important cabinet post, deemed a little bit lesser than Treasury. So, look, we'll just kind of have to continue to read the tea leaves and see who emerges from this scrum.
What about for Attorney General? He said he's nominating former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi to run the Justice Department. What do we know about Bondi?
Yeah, her name emerged hours after Matt Gaetz withdrew his name from consideration. Gaetz was a very polarizing pick. He has been under FBI investigation for alleged sex trafficking. It should be noted that Gaetz denies those charges, that no charges were ever brought against him, as a matter of fact. But there is this looming House Ethics Committee report that was threatened to be released that had even more salacious details about the congressman's activities. He made a trip to Capitol Hill this week after meeting with a handful of senators. He could basically count to 4, right? So we know that the incoming Republican-controlled Senate is going to have 53 Republican senators. That means if you lose more than 3, you can't get nominated, even with J.D. Vance's tie-breaking vote. And so once he could count to 4, no Republican votes, he knew he was finished and very quickly withdrew. It's interesting the timing of Bondi's name being mentioned then by, or putting in consideration by the president-elect, just hours afterwards makes you think maybe there was a backup plan all along to Gaetz. But she is a much more conventional pick. She's been the Florida Attorney General, but she's also very close to Trump politically and has had his back politically on a number of things, including an investigation of Trump University, the whole election denial. She's on board with this idea that the 2020 election was stolen. And so politically, she's also very close to the former president, but more easily confirmable, clearly, than Gaetz was.
Especially now, right? Because now we're like, well, anybody's better than Matt Gaetz. I wonder if that was part of the, strategy. First, I want to ask, though, about the Ethics Committee investigation. Did they find something else? Beyond the statutory rape allegations, right? That he had sex with a 17-year-old at a party while doing drugs. Was there more of which he was accused?
Yeah, all we really know of that ethics committee report is what the lawyers for two of the women involved have told us, right? So the investigation itself is secret, but if you are a witness or you represent a witness to that investigation, you can certainly talk about your own testimony. And so that's sort of what has come out. There's the two women who say that they witnessed Gates having sex with an underage woman and also a girl, and also that they themselves were paid for sex from the former congressman. That's as much as we know. And we do also have reporting from my colleague Ted Ban and David Ingold today that says that there's a large amount of unexplained processing fees that ran through the congressman's campaign account. That's raised some interest. There's a complaint to the Federal Elections Commission to investigate that further. So there may also be a financial aspect of this, but we simply don't know.
I wonder if, at the time that he made the Matt Gaetz choice, and he also picked a Fox News host to run the entire military-industrial complex, and then I can't even remember her, Tulsi Gabbard to be the intelligence boss. Everyone was speculating as to why he was making such, at least to our ears, seemingly ridiculous picks for such important positions. And someone pointed out that maybe it's so that he could get his second choice pretty easily nominated. Are people talking about that in Washington?
Yeah, there's one more that you forgot about, and that's Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to run the Department of Health and Human Services, another sort of controversial pick for his kind of anti-science, anti-vaccine views. And yeah, is there a sort of an art of the deal aspect to this from our, negotiator-in-chief, president-elect? Quite possibly. Look, he was someone who was not afraid, even during his first presidency, to send a lot of names up to Capitol Hill. A lot of them never went anywhere. He ended up, by the time he turned over the government to Joe Biden, reluctantly, to say the least, on January 20th, 2021, he had a large sort of acting cabinet of members who had never been confirmed by the Senate. Their nominations languished for years and years. And so that's one of the reasons why he's argued that he needs this power under the Constitution of recess appointments, where he's asking the Senate to go out of session after January 20th, turn its back, pay no attention, and he will appoint people through recess appointments to allow them to serve up to 2 years without Senate confirmation. Gates did not stick around for that, so there might not have been a whole lot of optimism that gambit will work, but that's still something that the president-elect is pushing.
Right. I also have to remind myself that, up here in New York City, we clearly have a very different perspective, and at least to some extent really misunderstood what the American people wanted. Matt Gaetz did win in the most recent election, the first congressional district in Florida. So people in Florida vote for him, Botox or not. They're in with Matt Gaetz, even if he did a little bit too much filler. Gregory Cordy, thanks so much for joining us out of Washington, D.C. Matt Miller here with Emily Griffeo, filling in for Tim and Carol. This is Bloomberg.
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Stocks now well off session highs. Moments ago, we had NASDAQ dipping into the red. Right now, it is holding on to a gain of 1 point. Little change there. The S&P holding on to an 11-point advance, up by 0.2%. Dow Industrials, though, up 327. That is a gain of 0.75%. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares, the outperformer, up now by 1.8%. 10-year 4.40% with a 2-year 4.37%. Spot gold up 1.5%. 27.10 for an ounce of the precious metal right now. West Texas Intermediate crude up 2%. 71.47 for a barrel of WTI. Bitcoin at a record 99,420 now on Bitcoin. Topic we were just talking about, up by 1.3%. So again, recapping here, the S&P up by 0.2%. Briefly, UPS is going to pay $45 million to settle claims by the Securities and Exchange Commission that the courier misrepresented its financial results by improperly valuing its freight business. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Charlie, thanks very much for that. Matt Miller here in the Bloomberg Business Week studio with Emily Grafeo. Carol and Tim are off today, flying back from San Francisco on, what's the opposite of the red eye? They're taking the lazy day flight.
Yeah, the daytime.
They're taking the
frolic.
we have nothing but time flight back from San Francisco. We have, I'm not sure if you're aware, but the wealthiest viewers of any cable television network, and obviously on the Bloomberg terminal we have clients who do pretty good for themselves in terms of how much money they make. So it's no surprise that the most read story on the terminal is how rich people can avoid paying taxes. And quant giant AQR has come up with a unique and a novel way to do that. We bring in Sam Potter, senior editor out of London, to talk about this. I love this story, Sam. Basically, Cliff Asness and his crew have come up with a way that you can even avoid your federal income taxes by what? You buy an asset that has losses and then swap it out for essentially the same asset, but you get to keep the losses and mark them up against your earnings?
That's not quite it, Matt, actually. That might be a technique that you take with capital gains, for instance. We do see that kind of thing happening. With this one, it involves swap contracts, so derivatives. AQR has basically figured out that they are treated, it's kind of a gray area in tax law. So on the one hand, they can be treated as debt, on the other hand, as equity. So what it enables them to do is to use them as part of their underlying trade. And if the bet is a losing bet, the swap they take out is a losing bet, then the payments they have to make to their counterparty count as what is called ordinary losses. And ordinary losses are deductible from income. On the other hand, if they terminate the bet early, they can close it off at a capital gain or loss. So these swaps that they use essentially give them the possibility of creating ordinary losses, which can be deducted from income.
Wait a second. That seems even easier than what I was thinking. And beyond capital gains, you could really limit your tax bill from like W-2 earnings. So can I get involved in this?
I mean, it sounds easy, right? But there's a reason that, well, we don't know how much this is happening actually, but it's quite complicated. The barriers to entry for the AQR product are extremely high. So you're going to need a minimum $5 million to invest to get in there. I know probably for you, Matt, that's a breeze, but for a lot of us, it's going to be a struggle. So the barriers are entry high. The execution of it is quite complicated. There is underlying investment risk because there is a strategy that underlies it that is trying to produce alpha, is trying to make money. And that may not happen. It could lose money. But just at the moment, it's had a good couple of years. And last year, I think it generated ordinary losses equivalent to 31% of the capital that had gone into the fund.
Sam, just how good of a deal are these investors in this strategy getting, especially when you compare it to just any ordinary tax loss harvesting kind of strategy?
That's extremely difficult to answer because it's fairly, these are private funds. They're not very opaque. There's not much information. Justina Lee, the reporter on this story, did an amazing job just to figure out the details of it. So we don't know exactly how much investors have profited from this. And it's going to depend on your individual circumstances, right? You might have a $1 million a year income. You might be less, more. You might have more coming from your investments. What we do know is that as a voice in the story says, it's a new frontier. So Wall Street has got incredibly good at dealing with capital gains taxes through the traditional tax loss harvesting that we all know about. If this becomes a widespread thing, then it could have be a significant benefit for anyone who's got large income.
What do the critics say?
It's hard to find. I wouldn't say there are critics of this specific product because it is, again, it's not widely publicized. I think our story is the first one you will find on it. But generally, the function of the rules that allows this treatment of swaps, the critics point out that most of the tax code, most of the tax rules are designed to keep capital and income in different buckets. And you have this one point where there were good reasons why they did it, by the way, why the rules are what they are, but it's this slight overlap that AQR has latched onto, and there is an argument, I guess, that that's kind of damaging to the overall idea of keeping income and capital separate.
So this fund, the AQR TA Delphi Plus fund, that's it, right? Does it have any competitors that Justina found out about?
So we know this is one that we found out about because AQR has started to market it a little bit, and we found out about presentations they were giving on it. They also have two more, apparently, one called the Helix Fund and one called the Legacy Fund. And one of those is actually bigger than Delphi, but doesn't seem to have been as widely promoted. Plus, there is an ex-AQR guy who left the company left the firm about 6 years ago, started out a tax hedge fund called Quantino. And we gather from sources that Quantino has at least one small strategy that can do this. Beyond that, we don't know yet how many other firms or competitors there might be.
All right.
Sam Potter, thank you very much for joining us back in London. We're going to go next to Carmen Renicky. She is a Bloomberg News equities reporter here with us, and she's going to talk about Super Microcomputer. Oh my gosh, that stock has been on a wild ride. What are you watching?
It has had an absolutely crazy week. I was just looking, shares right now are up about 11%. This is on track to gain more than 75% this week, which is the best week ever for this stock, which has also just had a completely crazy up and down year. So what happened this week is on Monday, the company, which had fallen out of compliance for listing on the NASDAQ, submitted to the NASDAQ a plan to regain compliance, which means filing some delayed 10Ks and 10Qs. It also announced that it has a new auditor, BDO USA. And I think this is really the piece that people were excited about and that traders are trading on, because this is, it just means that it'll be easier for the company to actually file those filings and get back into compliance to stay listed on the NASDAQ.
The fact that they actually found someone who agreed to testify that their numbers aren't fraudulent. Like, if that's the bar, it's pretty low, right? So
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. I mean, this is a company that's burned through a few auditors in the past few years. It's one of the reasons that it delayed filing its 10K was a short seller report from Hindenburg Research came out sort of calling into question some accounting. Ernst & Young, its previous auditor, stepped down in October, citing issues with governance and transparency. So yeah, finding a new auditor is a big deal. And it kind of remains to be seen what exactly, what will happen next. The NASDAQ still hasn't accepted Supermicro's plan, so they've filed. They said, we have a plan to stay compliant. The NASDAQ now has to say yes or no to that. It's assumed that it'll take 2 to 5 weeks for anything to come out on that. And then if the NASDAQ does accept the plan, it has until February to file these reports, which, as as I've reported this out, it seems like is not the easiest lift, right? Like this is still sort of a truncated timeline to potentially, deal with these kinds of issues. Still, that being said, some analysts seem to think that this really has removed an overhang from the stock, and as we can see, more buyers than sellers today.
So what would happen to Supermicro if it was delisted from the NASDAQ?
Yeah, so it would be taken off the exchange. It would go over the counter. It would also be removed from the NASDAQ 100 and the S&P 500, which it just joined this year. So that's a huge deal. Obviously, it would mean a big rebalance for a lot of people, and yeah, a lot of trading.
It's pretty amazing. It's still a $20 billion company. And if your auditor, one of the most respected auditors in the world, says, peace out, like we can't have our names even associated with your books, that should be a black mark, right? But if you look over the last 5 years, I always default to 5 years because I use the comp function a lot on the Bloomberg. The stock is up 1,471%.
It has had an incredible run. It's obviously gotten a huge lift from the AI wave. It's sort of seen as a trading peer, at least, to NVIDIA, and it actually got a shout out this week on NVIDIA's earnings call. NVIDIA said, this is one of our most reliable partners. And so, yeah, we've seen this stock really, really take off.
What is the precedence for companies being delisted? Have we ever seen a company then return after a delisting and come back to the exchange?
Question. Companies do get delisted. Supermicro itself has previously been delisted and come back onto the exchange. So yes, that's certainly something that happens. I don't know of an instance where a company has done it twice. But yeah, it's definitely something that happens.
We'll have to look into that, Matt.
Actually, I was just starting to look into it. I'm typing away.
Doing some research over here.
One of the things I did was pull up SPLC, which is one of my favorite functions on the terminal. For a company like this especially, it shows you the supply chain, and you can see their biggest suppliers, NVIDIA, right at the top of that list, their biggest customers. I know Big Blue is one of those, which, back in my day, IBM was the most reputable tech company. Obviously, it's dropped a little bit in terms of, its size and weight, but still is a company that people know and certainly trust. SMCI, I guess their earnings hasn't really been slowed down by the change from EY to BDO.
I think it's too early to really say. So they did, maybe a few weeks ago at this point, give sort of an update. They called it a business update. It was essentially an earnings report. And they gave, I think, a little bit of a weaker forecast than people had expected. So shares were actually sort of under pressure from that, if I remember correctly.
I should say the revenue has just been soaring, right? If you look back in 2020, they were making like $3 billion in revenue. And now we're talking about 25, just 4 years later. Carmen, great having you here with us. Thanks so much for joining us in the Bloomberg Business Week studio. Carmen Reinecke there from our print team. Matt Miller here with Emily Grafeo, filling in for Tim and Carol on this Friday. We'll be back in just a moment with the CFO of Home Depot. This is Bloomberg.
It's 2:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We've got blue chip and small cap shares advancing today with the Dow Jones Industrial Average up 361 points now, a gain of 0.8%. The S&P up 16, up 0.3. NASDAQ right now up 22, up 0.1%. 10-year 4.41%. The 2-year 4.37%. Gold up $39 the ounce, up 1.5%. West Texas Intermediate crude 71.26 a barrel, up by 1.6%, and Bitcoin right now 99,325, up 1.3%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Charlie, thanks very much for that. Charlie Pellet with your Business Flash. Matt Miller here in the Bloomberg Business Week studio with Emily Grafeo, and we have a special guest. As I said, the CFO of Home Depot joins us, Richard McPhail, as well as Nina Trentman. She runs the Bloomberg CFO briefing, so it's great to have both of you with us. And I guess I'll just kick it off with one to Richard as we kind of gauge the strength of the U.S. consumer and the housing market. You're in a perfect position to give us an outlook on both. How do we look, 4 days ahead of Black Friday?
Well, Matt and Emily and Nina, thank you for having me. So, look, as we've said now for the last year or two, the U.S. consumer remains healthy and strong and engaged in home improvement. We had a third quarter that just ended in October where we actually saw performance better than expected. Now, we attribute most of that to the fact that weather was exceptional across the country. We also had some impact from hurricanes, obviously. But, it's a good sign when the sun is out, our customers are engaged and outdoors doing projects. So we think the customer mindset is healthy. Now, you ask about the state of housing. There is some interplay here with home improvement. If you think about the last 5 years, since 2019, we've seen unprecedented increases in home values and home equity. Home values up right around 50% since 2019. Home equity positions up right around 80%. And so you've seen unprecedented wealth creation in housing. What's interesting about that is typically that drives home improvement demand and home improvement spend as homeowners invest in their homes. What our customers tell us, though, is that the interest rate environment is still sticky. We actually saw mortgage rates increase since the September Fed meeting, so that's led to a disincentive for folks to move and do projects that are oriented with moving. And if you think about those larger remodeling projects that are oftentimes financed by debt drawn against home equity positions, our customers tell us while those rates are decreasing slightly, they're still around 8.25% to 8.5%. And so they're saying, look, we're deferring large projects for the moment until we see what happens with rates. So you have a healthy customer with a deferral mindset when it comes to larger projects.
Richard, maybe I can follow up on that. During our interview, we also talked about the impact of your business potentially stemming from tariffs as the new administration comes in next year. Talk to us a little bit about that, how you navigated that in 2019, and also how you're thinking about that going into next year.
Sure. Well, first, it's too early to speculate on what the administration might be thinking here. So we don't want to speculate on particulars. In 2017, we saw tariffs of significant degree in certain classes of goods. There were some appliances classes that saw tariffs upwards of 25%. Look, that's something that we sit down with our supplier base and work through. And so we've got a lot of experience in this, and we are ready for whatever environment we're going to be operating in. Again, too early to speculate, but we feel like if there's anybody who can manage through this, we can. And unique to the Home Depot, perhaps over half of our products are actually manufactured in the United States. And so if you think about the less than half that is manufactured or sourced from foreign countries, we've been diversifying our countries of origin, really for the last 15 years, we're in a different position than we were in 2017 with respect to diversification. That's something we're going to continue.
So, Richard, I'm wondering, what is the strategy to grow the business right now when we're in an environment where home sales are at the lowest level in over a decade? How does Home Depot kind of combat that?
Well, you know, Emily, there's so much improvement we can make in our current model. We have the 5th largest e-commerce business in the United States, even though folks don't normally think about that. But the uniqueness of that business is it is interconnected with our stores. Virtually all of our customers who shop online shop in our stores as well. But there are too many points of friction when you think about customer returns, order modifications, and the delivery experience. We're making huge gains in taking friction out of the process for our customer, but we're nowhere near where we want to be. We know if we begin to delight customers more, that absolutely translates into higher sales. Another huge opportunity for the Home Depot is with the professional contractor. Roughly half of our sales come from that professional contractor who's working on behalf of the homeowner. We've made significant investments in an ecosystem to really drive into that larger remodel. And so while the market is soft for remodeling, our ability to capture market share really shouldn't depend on what the external environment is. We've invested in a digital experience, in rolling out a sales force across the nation, and fulfillment assets and capabilities, networks of flatbed distribution centers that will be in 17 markets this year, where we can get product straight to the job site, not even touching the store, straight to the job site, same day, next day. And the uniqueness of Home Depot is, while there are plenty of companies serving the pro like that, we're the only one who can serve them across all product categories. So we can simplify the pros' lives, and they turn to us because they know that they can rely on us. And I should say, actually, Emily, one thing that I think is unique to the Home Depot, you know, we're building stores again. We really stopped in any material sense building stores in 2008. In 2023, we announced an 80-store build that will roll out over 5 years. By the end of this year, we will have built 25 of those new stores, and we're so excited about what we're already seeing. It's one of the best investments we can actually make at Home Depot.
All right, Richard, great to have a little bit of time with you, and I hope we can get you back either here on Bloomberg Business Week, or you join me on my show every day, 9 to 11 on Bloomberg Open Interest. David McPhail there, the CFO of Home Depot. Sorry, Nina, I'm kind of stealing your guess here.
Yes, you're stealing my thunder.
Well, you have a lot of it, so there's enough to go around. You talked to a lot of important CFOs for the CFO briefing. One of them recently, CFO of Saudi Aramco, and what did he have to say?
Yeah, so that was earlier this week in Boston. I got to catch up with him there. We covered quite a range of topics, sort of ranging from their dividend spending, debt financing plans, CapEx. So yeah, I was quite pleased to secure that interview. Amongst the things that we talked about was their plans to spend over $120 billion this year on dividends, which is of course a mind-boggling number. There is a lot of talk around sort of how much Saudi Aramco will keep spending on dividends going forward. I think the main point there is just that they have a performance-led portion of that dividend, which they implemented in starting last year, when basically they realized, okay, we're generating a lot of returns from high energy prices following the invasion of Ukraine through Russia. This performance-led portion will be reset at the end of this year, and the question is very much, okay, well, what will this company be spending on dividends going forward? Because they moved from having a lot of surplus cash into actually moving into a net debt position at the end of the past quarter, and so there's been a lot of questions around that the CFO received.
Yeah, very interesting stuff. And I know he is an MIT alum. He was there in Boston giving a speech, and some protesters made such a racket that he actually had to leave the event and not come back. You can see all of that and more in Nina's CEO briefing. Get the latest news whenever you want it with Bloomberg's News Now. Top stories from our global team of reporters at the click of a button. Get the Bloomberg News Now app on the Bloomberg Business app, Bloomberg.com, or wherever you get your podcasts, and search around there for the CEO briefing as well. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Messer and Tim Stennebeck on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
Matt Miller here in the Bloomberg Business Week studio with Emily Grafeo. Tim and Carol are off today. And it's time now for Options Insight, where Abigail Doolittle brings in a guest and gets you the intel you need to trade in this market. Abigail Doolittle, I'll hand it over to you.
And today, Matt, thank you so much. We are speaking with Scott Bauer, CEO of Prosper Trading Academy. Scott, great to have you with us on this Friday, and happy Friday to you and to your family.
You too, Abigail.
Where has the volatility gone? Because it seems to me that there's quite a few factors out there that could create tremendous uncertainty, from the Fed to geopolitical tensions, not to mention the fact that a new administration is coming into town in just a couple of weeks, and yet we have this VIX below 16.
You know, it was very interesting. Earlier in the week, we saw elevated VIX, and it was almost in preparation just for NVIDIA earnings. And in fact, the VIX got to levels, and what we saw expected move in the S&Ps and the overall market was actually greater ahead of NVIDIA earnings than what is projected for ahead of the Fed next month. So, you know, after those earnings came out, kind of a sigh of relief for the overall market, and that's why we're seeing it so subdued, sub 16 right now. I don't think it's going to last down here. I don't think it should last, because as you mentioned, there's so many things coming at the market. Yes, we have a holiday next week, so you know, typically we may see some lighter trading, but with all of these things that you talked about, to me, these VIX levels are way too low. And you know what? There's been some upside call buying right here. In talking to some of the traders here, I don't know if it's you know 50 cents, but lots of January upside, 30, 50 call spreads. Today, there was some really big December upside options being bought. So I think people are looking at this and say maybe the VIX is too low here.
Our old friend 50 Cent, who not to be confused with the rapper, but an unknown option buyer who buys around that level. Actually, why is he called 50 Cent, Scott? Is it because he typically buys 50 cent cost contracts?
That's exactly right. But the reason I said it's probably not him is because typically he will just buy a naked option right around 50 cents. This happened to be a spread, the 30, 50 call spread.
But why are you then making the distinction that you don't think it's like what about the trade reminds you of it? Because it's sort of close to 50 cent?
Exactly. It traded around 35 to 40 cents or so.
Yep.
So I was just bringing that up because this happened to be a spread where 50 Cent will typically come in and just buy a naked option, whatever strike it is.
Okay, well, there's many 50 cent copiers out there. And I wonder what the Fed would think about NVIDIA being more important than they are. It's not generally that way. But on the other hand, with NVIDIA being about 25% of the S&P 500's roughly 25% year-to-date move, it does make some sense. So these vol buyers, they're doing so for January, preparing for ahead of the administration. Or are there any other macro events, or is it just too far, too fast? It's time for this market to cool off, Scott.
I do think it's too far, too fast. You know, January from a market perspective, still 2 months away, but a lot can happen, right? We have the Fed meeting. We have rates. We don't know where they're going. This 450 level in the 10-year, if we break that to the upside, how is the market going to react to that? In the past, it hasn't really reacted very well. And then, yes, with the new administration coming in and some of the proposed changes, the tariffs, et cetera, I think people are just kind of, getting ready for that. And as we said, VIX is pretty low right now. Right where we're trading, Abigail, we've talked about this before.
Yep.
A VIX of 16 is equivalent to about a 1% daily move in the S&Ps. We're seeing that for the most part. So, this 16 or higher is warranted.
So in about 30 to 45 seconds, Scott, what else are you hearing down there on the floor of SIBO? I know you're in that VIX pit. There's got to be some pretty good banter outside of some of those call trades you already talked about.
Absolutely. And what I'm hearing is buy this protection when you can and not when you have to. I mean, traders like to do that. And this is the time to do that. I think everyone is still, kind of leaning moderately bullish to the upside, whether these animal spirits that we're seeing in Bitcoin and Bitcoin related stocks are going to die down or not. Overall, with the health of the economy and earnings being okay, earnings weren't, blowout on the upside, but they were okay. I think a lot of people are thinking we can move higher, but they want to have that protection just in case.
Makes sense to have some hedging when you've got such big rallies in Bitcoin. My gosh, that parabolic uptrend, well, that will at some point reverse, although it looks like it's going to get above 100K first. Scott Bauer, CEO of Prosper Trading Academy out there in Chicago. Thanks so much for joining us for Options Insight. Matt, back to you.
All right, Abigail, thanks very much. Abigail Doolittle there with your Options Insight. Coming up to the end of the hour here, so another 61 minutes left in trading. Emily Grafeo, we're looking at a rally on the Dow. I know the kids don't look at that index, right?
I was told not to look at the Dow or even mention it ever.
Wait, who told you that? Was it John Farrow? Because John Farrow is very anti the Dow Jones Industrial
I won't name names.
Average. But I will say, if you go on your Bloomberg terminal and type WEI for World Equity Indexes, the first thing you see is the Dow, followed by the S&P, and then all of a sudden it turns like Brazilian. So there's no Russell 2000 or NASDAQ 100 on there until you click a little bit deeper into the views. In any case, one more hour to go. We have Tesla, Microsoft, and Apple leading the trade. This is Bloomberg.
CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by O'Reilly Auto Parts.
I'm Christopher Cruz. The judge in President-elect Donald Trump's New York hush money trial has put off his sentencing indefinitely. Legal analyst Jessica Levinson.
We don't have a roadmap for this. There's no legal guidebook. So what we have is a situation where I think it makes all the sense in the world for the judge to say, let's push pause.
The judge also gave Trump's lawyers 10 days to file a motion to dismiss the case. An attorney who attended the trial in support of Trump will be nominated to be the nation's chief law enforcement officer. Here's CBS's Nicole Skanga.
Former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi has been a supporter of Donald Trump since the first time he ran for president.
There is only one choice in this election: Donald Trump.
She defended him in his first impeachment trial. Now she's the president-elect's new pick for U.S. Attorney General after former Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz dropped out.
Another bomb cyclone is headed for Northern California just days after the region was hit by one.
Some 300 people became temporarily trapped inside a hospital and hotel in Santa Rosa. This after the North San Francisco Bay Area received a foot of rain in 48 hours.
Driving in the rain is something that I really don't like to do.
Trevor is trying to see the silver lining in the storm system.
It's going to be good for us because we need the rain.
Meanwhile, residents are preparing for a second wave of heavy rain and high winds. Sarah Henry with the city of Alameda says they continue to make sandbags available.
So it's 5 per person, and hopefully people adhere to that because we want to make sure we have enough for everybody.
Matt Bigler for CBS News, Alameda, California.
Florida's outspoken Surgeon General Dr. Joseph Latipo thinks fluoridization of tap water should come to an end.
We are issuing guidance to every community, every municipality, every county in Florida to stop adding fluoride to their community water systems.
He says multiple studies show fluoride is harmful to children and pregnant women. In Texas,
8-7, the motion passes.
The State Board of Education has voted to allow the state's public elementary schools to teach a Bible-based curriculum. After a 4,000-mile journey from Alaska, a huge spruce tree has made it to the nation's capital, where it will become the Capitol Christmas tree. The architect of the Capitol's Jim Kaufman.
Lighting the Capitol Christmas tree has been a holiday tradition since 1964. And it's one that we're always happy to be a part of.
The owners of a funeral home in Colorado have been accused of improperly storing 190 decaying bodies while promising their families and their loved ones were cremated or buried, have now pled guilty to state charges. The Dow is up almost 1% at this hour. This is CBS News. How do you define success?
What's the price of success? How about making at least $270,000 per year and having an overall net worth of more than $5 million? That's according to a survey from the financial services company Empower. It also found that only 27% of those questioned ranked wealth as the highest measure of financial success. 60% say happiness is the most important thing in life and being able to spend money on the things and experiences that bring joy. Jim Crisula, CBS News.
So far, 23-year-old Peter Frank has paddled his canoe from Michigan to Maryland about a quarter of the way on his planned journey of 6,000 miles to complete the Great Loop. That's a continuous waterway that includes part of the Atlantic and Gulf intracoastal waterways, the Great Lakes, part of Canada, and inland U.S. rivers. Frank says the voyage is a way to express his gratitude for being alive, a decade after almost being paralyzed in a car accident. Christopher Cruz, CBS News.
Choosing the right...
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
Matt Miller here with Emily Grafeo in the Bloomberg Business Week studio, filling in for Tim and Carol as they lazily fly back from San Francisco, just enjoying their day, you know, maybe getting a
Ice
facial,
cream sundae
little
in the
massage,
plane.
ice cream sundae, yeah, just chilling on a travel day, which is nice for them that they can get that perk. You know what we have this weekend?
No.
Formula One, the Grand Prix in Las Vegas.
Right. You're a car guy.
Yeah, so I'm pretty excited to talk to David West in a little bit. The host of Wall Street Week is going to come in here and tell us about some of his interviews with Christian Horner, the Red Bull team principal, Gunther Steiner, who used to run, obviously, the Haas team. If you watch Formula One, someone you would never forget. Zach Brown is going to talk to David on his show today. So a lot of Formula One interviews coming up in Wall Street. We're going to talk to David about the incredible sport to which I think like 500 million people tune in every weekend to watch Formula One racing. So it's very big. We also have, the holiday season, Black Friday coming up, although I guess every day is Black Friday now.
Yeah. So people were doing Black Friday sales November 1. I was looking to buy a new mattress. And in October, the mattress salespeople were like, get ready for Black Friday sales. It's coming up.
Did you get one?
I did get a new mattress, yeah.
Satva?
No, it's an avocado.
Avocado.
It's
That's
like
good
a
for your
natural-
generation.
yeah,
That
yeah,
tracks.
yeah.
Okay, well, we have Katie Thomas going to join us from the Carney Consumer Institute on their recent study. They talked to 14,000 shoppers, so we'll figure out how the consumer looks heading into this holiday season. And right now, the markets continue to rise, up for the day, up for the week. Let's get over to Charlie Pellet with a wrap of what's going on.
Thank you very much, Matt Miller. And here's what's going on. We begin with the headline right off the Bloomberg Professional Service, and that is the FCC's $8 billion phone subsidy will be getting Supreme Court scrutiny. Now, this case could put new limits on regulatory agencies. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, well off session highs, but holding on to gains. 53 minutes to go until that closing bell clangs on Wall Street. S&P right now at 59.60, up 12. That is a gain of 0.2%. The Dow up 343, up 0.8%. NASDAQ up 9. That is a gain right now of just under 0.1%. The Russell 2000 index of small cap shares ripping higher by 1.6%. 10-year 4.40%. The 2-year 4.36%. Gold up $37 the ounce, up 1.4%. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.5%. 71.19 a barrel. Bitcoin, all eyes on Bitcoin now. 99,420, up by 1.4%. Gap shares now up by 10.7% after raising its full-year outlook. Dana Telsey is Chief Research Officer at Telsey Advisory, and on surveillance this morning, she talked about Gap's quarter.
One of the things they're doing right is the consistency of looking at the product and really elevating it today's times. Look at the wide leg denim jeans. They are remodeling some of their stores. At Old Navy, the kids business is important, and the kids business weakened in this quarter given the weather that was out there. Coming out of the quarter, kids strengthened. And so I think off-price value and where there's newness and innovation, consumers are going.
And indeed, Gap shares up 10.7%. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Charlie, thanks very much. Charlie Pellet there with your Bloomberg Business Flash. All right, holiday season quickly approaching. And we want to get our finger on the pulse of the consumer. To do that, we go over to Katie Thomas. She's from the Carney Consumer Institute. They've recently done a study of 14,000 shoppers. She joins us from Pittsburgh, in the middle of America, where the normal people live. Katie, thanks so much for joining us. How do the normal people feel right now?
The normal people are actually feeling okay. Going into the holiday season, there's a lot of optimism. Even talking to folks post-election, people are surprisingly willing to spend. They say they're feeling better about the economy, or conversely, they're participating in some retail therapy. They're concerned tariff prices will drive up the cost of electronics and other items. So I'm anticipating a healthy holiday season, even though it's a little bit shortened given the late Thanksgiving timing. Like you guys said, Black Friday sales have been going on for weeks already, so I think we're going to have a strong season.
And what are these consumers buying? Are they going to the big ticket items, or are they being a little bit choosier and just finding maybe smaller luxuries?
Yeah, I think right now we're seeing people still feel pretty thoughtful. I think we saw it in the last couple of weeks with earnings, right? Walmart coming through with really strong price value, and that's what you're seeing with consumers in general. And that starts to tie into some of the work that we just wrapped up around tensions consumers are facing. So you see them wanting to spend. People love to spend around the holiday, but they do still have these lingering concerns around how their wallet looks, and they don't want to overspend and start the year off on the wrong foot.
Yeah, I don't love to spend around the holiday. I just feel like I have no choice, right? I mean, you got to buy people presents, you got to get plane tickets, you got to hire more staff or whatever. I mean, I don't have staff. No, I don't know. I'm just trying to think of the things that you might want to be spending money on for the holidays. Are people feeling like their wages have really kept up with inflation? Because it seems to me I get one answer from one economist and a different answer from another. So, how are we doing in terms of keeping up with higher prices?
Yeah, I mean, I think objectively speaking, when you look at data rolled up, that is what you see, Matt, that technically wages are outpacing inflation. But to your exact point, we run some analytics with what we call the Consumer Stress Index, and we have seen a slow uptick in concerns around cost of living, as well as concerns about personal job security, which is a little bit concerning, even though you're not seeing that much in the employment and job growth numbers right now. People feeling concerned that if they lost their job, they may not be able to find one, or that they could lose their job. That could be something meaningful that drives kind of a pullback in spend and a resistance to spend. But when it comes specifically to the holidays, people do typically like to spend on gifts and on gifts for themselves. And then what you'll see is a bit of a slowdown in the new year.
You mentioned demographics in the notes that you sent over, and I'm wondering what your research is showing about just how different demographics are spending and how they act as a consumer. I imagine the Gen Zs are getting a lot of their favorite brands from TikTok and social media, and I'm wondering if that kind of spans across all ages now.
We're certainly seeing a pickup there. One of the things we see, though, is it's hard to slice just by demographics alone. So we ask consumers in our work, for instance, one question is, are you living paycheck to paycheck? And we, 2 out of 3 consumers actually say yes. It's self-reported, so that could mean a lot of different things. But when we split that into paycheck to paycheck and then living within means, we actually see a lot more similarities there in terms of behaviors and stressors than if we cut by just income alone. So we are seeing people kind of, it depends a little bit on more of those attitudinal psychographics. So not necessarily Gen Z on TikTok, but just your likelihood to be engaging on a social media platform. Matt, to your point at the top, there are folks across the country who are not all that engaged or all that online as some of the rest of us are. So it really kind of depends on what your media consumption looks like.
Oh, they're so lucky. You know what? Speaking of psychographic, I noticed this sentence in the survey packet. Just in time for the holidays, this nuanced meta-economic and psychographic view is based on a unique set of macroeconomic data and proprietary KCI research. Are you sure you're in Pittsburgh? Because I don't know what that means.
I don't think those are the notes I sent over, so I'm going to have to. That's a lot of a bit of a word salad there, Matt. But
what do you mean when you say psychographic?
Well, it's just really capturing the lifestyle of a consumer. So this research was really grounded in the fact that consumers have continued to see this proliferation of choice. You guys were actually talking about it with the mattresses. We have more options than ever, more access to information than ever. And then we tend to get lost in this narrative that consumers are increasingly demanding more and more options, when in fact, in most categories, consumers are overwhelmed by what's out there or simply satisfied. They don't feel like they need this constant influx of options. So the psychographics there will really it's the devil's in the details. We have to understand the push-pull dynamic that's happening there within consumers and between consumers and brands.
So how does a brand kind of build success off of that? Because I mean, yeah, the mattresses, ultimately it came down to there was an avocado store around where I was. I laid on the mattress. I was like, this is good. I don't want to think about this anymore because there are so many options. So how does a brand figure out how to stand out?
Yeah, well, Emily, I think it's just that. So it's thinking, we like to sometimes call it relevant choice rather than more or less choice. It comes down to portfolio strategy, growth strategy, innovation planning, and like if brands are really innovating for the right reason. So you think, for instance, of grocery. Sometimes innovation happens simply so they can hold a place on shelf. When you think of, any kind of mall retailer, it's just like a classic merchandising calendar and just this continued churn, or perhaps sometimes it's in response to competition. It's really starting to ask tougher questions there of, do we need these additional options? Do we need to cause more confusion? Do we really for instance, yogurt? Yogurt has over 300 SKUs on most shelves, but the most popular flavors have been the same 5 for the last 50 years. So even though some new flavors are nice, it's just really finding the right balance.
Key lime pie. That's one of those 5, right?
That one's good.
I'm not sure.
Katie, thanks so much for joining us. Always a pleasure talking to you and hearing from the Carney Consumer Institute. Katie Thomas there out of Pittsburgh talking to us about how consumers in the U.S. are feeling this holiday season. Avocado is a brand I had never heard of before. I thought I was being pretty new and, young and fashionable with Satva, but what is avocado?
I actually hadn't heard of it either, but I was in Williamsburg and they had a store. You're gonna hate this. So they had kombucha and cold brew on tap, complimentary for the customers in the store. It
almost seems like it's a joke. Like in Williamsburg, there's a mattress vendor called Avocado that has kombucha and cold brew in the store.
Their pitch, I don't know that much about the mattress, but I ultimately bought it again because I laid on it. It was comfortable. I needed a mattress. I didn't want to think about it. But they have a green pitch as well. They talk about how their mattress is more environmentally friendly.
It's so sustainable.
Yeah.
That's good. So you feel good about yourself as you're sleeping on it.
That pitch didn't allure me in as much as just, I need a mattress, and this is here.
All right. I need some tires. So if you see anybody with Continental Extreme Contact DSW 6+ tires on sale, I need a set of 4 of those for my Dodge Challenger, which is not at all sustainable.
I don't think they have kombucha at tire shops.
4-liter V8. No, definitely not. Just cold black coffee. When we come back, we'll talk to Jenny Rook from the Genoa Ventures firm about strategies for investing in early-stage high-growth companies.
It's 3:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We've got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing right now. 39 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. Bitcoin at 99,419, up 1.4%. S&P higher by 11, a gain of 0.2%. The Dow up 331, up by 0.7%. And NASDAQ right now up 6 points, up by less than 0.1%. 10-year 4.41%. The 2-year 4.37%. Gold up 1.4%, 27.07 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.5%, 71.18 on crude. And again, Bitcoin bears repeating, up 1.4%, 99,445 on Bitcoin. Nadia Lovell is senior strategist at UBS Financial Services, and this morning on Surveillance, she told us she sees the S&P 500 climbing to 6,600 in 2025.
Our upside scenario, the bull case is calling for 7,000 on the S&P, but our downside scenario, bear case, which includes the threat of tariffs, would be 5,100. So I think we have to prepare for a market that could be a bit more choppier and volatile and sort of ebb and flow with the news around government policy, given the implications for next year. Some of the policies will be pro-growth, but some of them could also be headwinds to the market.
Nadia Lovell of UBS interviewed this morning on Bloomberg Surveillance. Briefly, Amazon is boosting its stake in OpenAI rival Anthropic. Amazon shares on an update for the rest of the market. Amazon slumping by 0.5%. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, thanks, Charlie. We're joined now by Jenny Rook, founder and managing director of Genoa Ventures. She's here in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio, usually in San Francisco, but here today in New York. Before we get to the companies and the investments that you're doing right now, because Genoa focuses on biotech and healthcare, what's your background?
I'm a scientist at heart. I was studying physics and software engineering when I fell in love with genetics, went and got my PhD there. So I really am excited about how those things are coming together, those technologies and biology. And then I've spent a career trying to figure out how to put that to work.
All right, so Wall Street, I guess, is one place that you could go to try and put that to work.
Indeed.
Did you hit that street before Sand Hill Road?
Not really. No, I kind of walked through first. I guess my closest path to Wall Street was really consulting to very large pharma companies. I spent some time at McKinsey. It was a great way to get familiar with what the big strategy questions were to the companies that matter to Wall Street. And so that's great perspective in working with startups to think about how they're going to bring innovation to Wall Street eventually.
And is there a more specific theme than biotech, healthcare? I mean, I know that you funded, for example, 2 female Nobel laureates.
So far, yeah, we're trying to keep funding the great Nobel laureates. Yes,
keep more.
1 per fund is my goal.
But the reason I think it's interesting is that I know some crazy small figure, like only 2% of total VC funding goes to women. So the fact that you've funded 2 already puts you kind of ahead of the pack.
By far, I think, yes. Yeah, we're proud of that. I think it comes down to just looking at the fundamentals and really asking what are the needs in healthcare and beyond, and how do the innovations that are happening in the laboratory address those needs, and really understanding what's happening at the fundamental level.
Okay, so tell us about some of the companies right now that you're invested in that you're currently excited about.
Yeah, well, so we're excited at companies that are bringing together biology and technology in untraditional ways. And so often they bring together founders who, some might be coming from healthcare, but you might have a